Chapter 1570, Life Rating. Chapter 1570, Life Rating. Serena's appearance immediately attracted the attention of every player in the World Summit. In truth, it was difficult not to notice her. Serena was a Tier 5 fallen angel. When she wasn't deliberately trying to suppress her aura, she could immobilize Tier 1 players with that alone. Even Sherfong was afraid of Serena despite standing so far away from her. The fallen angel's presence dominated the area as if she owned it. Since someone has obtained the inferior legendary shrine key, activate the divine staircase. Serena's voice echoed throughout the World Summit. Every player in the World Summit could hear her clearly. If you wish to obtain power, perform exploits that even the gods will acknowledge. When Serena fell silent, the World Summit began to tremble. One pitch-black shrine after another rose from the ground. They hovered in the air and were connected by pitch-black staircases. This spiral chain of shrines extended to the World Summit's peak. The formation of these spiraling shrines had lasted several minutes, and throughout the process, not a single player had moved from where they stood as they watched these shrines form in awe. Why did an NPC suddenly show up? What is this NPC trying to do? Could this be an event? What's the divine staircase? When the spiraling shrines were complete, a grounded, pitch-black shrine manifested among the many bronze shrines. The various players launched into a heated discussion about what this could be. Everyone was curious about the divine staircase Serena had mentioned. Shortly after, quite a few players approached the first black shrine. An inferior legendary shrine key? Is Hidden Soul's party responsible for triggering this divine staircase? Skyhawk, who was already relatively high up the mountain, looked at the new pitch-black shrines with shock and envy. Not only had Hidden Soul earned a large amount of time, but she had also obtained an inferior legendary shrine key. Thinking up to this point, he immediately commanded his companions, "Let's go. We have to take a look at the new shrine." At this point he could do nothing about the inferior legendary shrine key. After all, it was a bound item. But he could get a clear idea of the divine staircase's function. When players reached the grounded shrine, they examined the rules on the stone monument beside it. These players instantly revealed excited expressions. God, this divine staircase is amazing. Damn it. If I knew something like this would happen, I would have waited to come to the World Summit. These players gazed at the stone monument as if they were looking at a peerless treasure. How generous. Sherfong was just as surprised when he read the divine staircase's rules. Unlike the shrines around the World Summit, the divine staircase's shrines didn't require corresponding keys or time to unlock. Rather, players had to rely on their own power to ascend to the next shrine. Since it didn't cost time to climb the divine staircase, players could explore its shrines as long as they had time remaining. However, the number of times they could climb the divine staircase depended on the type of shrine key the players carried. Players could only climb the divine staircase once if they had a bronze shrine key, while mysterious iron keys would allow players to climb the staircase twice. Secret silver keys granted players 3 entries, fine gold keys granted 4, dark gold keys granted 5 entries, epic keys would allow players to climb 7 times, and inferior legendary keys allowed players access to the divine staircase 10 times. However, once players exhausted their entries, they'd be forced out of the World Summit regardless of how much time they had remaining. Meanwhile, each time players cleared a pitch-black shrine, they would earn a corresponding number of shrine points. They could then use these shrine points to purchase various items available in the World Summit. Players didn't need any specific qualifications to purchase these items. As long as they had the required number of points, they could buy any item they wanted. Sherfong wouldn't have been overly surprised if the items available were merely top-tier weapons and equipment, even epic weapons and equipment. The World Summit had plenty of epic shrines, and as long as players cleared the epic ranked entrance test, they could easily obtain epic items from the appropriately ranked shrines. What surprised Sherfong was the fact that players could use these SPs to improve their life rating. It was common knowledge in God's domain that improving one's life rating was extremely difficult. Improving one's life rating wasn't just a matter of a stronger physique. Rather, it was a life transition. For example, if one compared an archaic species to a normal human being, the archaic species' basic attributes would be several times higher than a human's of the same level. This was the difference of a higher life rating. This was also why archaic species became more difficult to deal with as they rose in level. Although players could improve their life ratings by upgrading their tiers, the improvement was minuscule. For example, an ordinary Tier 5 player's life rating was only slightly higher than an ordinary Tier 1 player's. This was also the reason that Tier 5 players were significantly weaker than Tier 5 monsters. The attribute difference wasn't much during the early levels, and players could easily close the gap with top-tier weapons and equipment. However, as players rose in levels, particularly after passing level 100, the advantage of a higher life rating would become apparent and would only become more evident as players progressed in the game. At which point, players might be able to kill other players of higher tiers, but they'd be dreaming if they thought they could take out monsters of higher tiers. Only after reaching Tier 6 would players truly transition. Tier 6 players' life rating was worlds apart from ordinary Tier 5 players. At Tier 6, players would also qualify to challenge Tier 6 gods. Meanwhile, players could actually improve their life ratings with the shrine points from the Divine Staircase. Why wouldn't Shifeng be shocked? Based on his knowledge, the players that had managed to improve their life ratings by other means than upgrading tiers had been exceedingly rare even after 10 years in God's domain. Even if players found some way to do so, it would be incredibly difficult, and they'd have to rely on luck and strength. In the past, God's domain's various superpowers had fought frequently over such opportunities. By securing such an opportunity, they could give their players a better chance of reaching Tier 6. In fact, the benefits of improving one's life rating were even more valuable than ordinary legendary items. Shifeng had never thought that the Divine Staircase before him would be such an opportunity. However, when he saw the price of improving one's life rating, he was speechless. Even the cheapest Bloodline required 100,000 shrine points and 1 exploit. Passing the first pitch black shrine only awarded 10 SPs. Although the others would award more, one still had to pass a considerable number of shrines to accumulate enough SPs to purchase the Bloodline. Furthermore, Shifeng had no idea of how to perform an exploit, and the rules didn't mention anything about it. Even if he collected 100,000 SPs without an exploit, he wouldn't be able to purchase a Bloodline to improve his life rating. Meanwhile, players could purchase various other items such as potions, designs, recipes, mounts, siege weapons, god crystals, and other precious items. There were even fragmented legendary items up for trade. Naturally, the fragmented legendary items were extremely expensive. Even the cheapest cost 70,000 SPs, while the more expensive items could cost up to 240,000 SPs and 3 exploits. Moreover, players had to spend the SPs they earned with each visit as their counter would reset to 0 when they returned. Fortunately, exploits were permanent and would only disappear when players spent them or deliberately deleted them. In other words, if players had a certain item in mind, they had to earn enough SPs in one visit to purchase it. Even so, the crowd before the first black shrine drooled over the prospects of treasure. After all, fragmented legendary items were practically illusory to current players. In fact, there hadn't been any news of a super guild obtaining one thus far. Suddenly, many players dashed into the first shrine and began their ascension. Shifeng didn't dawdle either, entering the shrine before him. This was a rare opportunity to secure a Bloodline for himself, and he had plenty of time. It'd be a huge waste if he didn't attempt it. Chapter 1571, Realm Lord. Chapter 1571, Realm Lord. As soon as Shifeng set foot in the pitch-black shrine, his environment transformed. It felt as if he had just stepped through a teleportation gate and arrived in an entirely different space. A dark forest loomed before him, and the howling of wolves occasionally echoed in his ears. In the darkness of night, he faintly saw pairs of crimson eyes flicker in the treetops. This is a survival battle? Shifeng wondered as he observed his surroundings. Although it was night here, his vision was unaffected. He could see around him as clearly as if the sun hung above him. Shifeng spotted over a dozen werewolves armed with crossbows and in excellent equipment standing in the trees around him. In addition, he spotted another dozen or so werewolves with spears and greatswords beneath the tree's cover, radiating an intense killing intent. All of these werewolves were level 55 or above, with the highest at level 58. They ranged between elites and special elites. If an ordinary player attempted to take all of these monsters on by themselves, they'd definitely be torn apart. As Shifeng observed these werewolves, the sound of a system notification reached his ears. System, clear this divine shrine to obtain a reward. When the system notification ended, a system map appeared in the corner of Shifeng's vision. A teleportation point had been marked on the map in the heart of the forest. It was obvious that he had to reach said teleportation point to leave the divine shrine. However, before Shifeng could examine the map closely, the werewolves in the treetops began to attack, the triple-loaded crossbows releasing their bolts at him simultaneously. At the same time, the werewolves on the ground began to close in, forming a tight encirclement around him. How troublesome. It seems that the system banned teleportation skills as well. I guess I have no choice but to run to the target. When Shifeng had noticed the werewolves' attacks, he had attempted to use space movement, teleporting to the destination directly. Unfortunately, teleportation skills were prohibited in the Divine Shrine. He had no choice but to unsheath Killing Ray and retaliate. A rain of bolts from above might be troublesome to ordinary players, but to Shifeng the bolts were practically negligible. He easily dodged the bolts and appeared before a level 56 elite werewolf in the blink of an eye. He lightly swung Killing Ray at the melee-focused werewolf. Shadow Blade. Numerous streaks of shadows cut past the elite werewolf, each hit dealing several tens of thousands of damage. Like a cannonball, the 2-meter-tall werewolf's body shot backward and slammed into the werewolves behind it. The monster only returned to the ground after flying over 20 yards. By the time it landed, however, its HP had reached 0. Its body turned to ash and disappeared, leaving several copper coins in its place. These monsters actually drop loot? Shifeng was slightly confused to see the copper coins on the ground. He had assumed that he'd be striving for nothing here. This was a kind of test, and tests normally didn't provide loot. However, Shifeng did not bother to kill the other werewolves. Instead, he swiftly maneuvered out of the circle of werewolves, heading straight for the teleportation array in the forest's heart. Combat players like Shifeng were no stranger to survival battles in God's domain. These situations were common in dungeons. If players focused on defeating the monsters in survival battles, they'd only get caught up in an endless cycle of combat, wasting their time. Shifeng, of course, didn't have a lot of time to waste, and even if he could kill these monsters easily, he'd still consume stamina. If he ran out of stamina midway through a battle, he'd become a sheep for the slaughter no matter how powerful he was. As he headed deeper into the forest, the werewolves went into a frenzy, chasing after him. However, Shifeng was simply too fast, and even the special elite-ranked werewolves could only watch as the distance between them and their target grew until the swordsman eventually left their sight. After a few more minutes of running, Shifeng reached the teleportation array in the heart of the forest. However, before he could approach the array, he felt a chill crawl down his spine. The cause of this creeping sensation was none other than a one-eyed werewolf with a massive greatsword that guarded the teleportation array. A realm lord? Shifeng stared at the one-eyed werewolf in shock. This one-eyed werewolf was over 3 meters tall, and although it was only a level 58 special elite, the mana circling it was extraordinary. It felt like this land's protected child. Spectre Werewolf, Realm Lord. Humanoid creature, special elite. Level 58 HP 4, 200, 000/4, 200, 000. In God's domain, the title of Realm Lord did not represent a monster's rank or bloodline. Rather, it was a buff that greatly enhanced the monster's skills and spells. Monsters with this title also had strengthened physiques and HPs. Basically, they were boss-like existences among monsters of the same level and rank. Realm Lords were not particularly rare in God's domain, but they were usually only found in level 50+ resource-rich maps. They protected these resource maps, and as long as they remained in their designated maps, they could display far more combat power than monsters of the same level and rank. Normally, player teams avoided Realm Lords as much as possible. Fighting these monsters simply wasn't worthwhile. Despite being so much stronger than monsters of the same level and rank, Realm Lords didn't offer additional or better loot. Is the Divine Shrine itself some sort of opportunity? After a moment of surprise, Shifeng's lips curled into a smile. When players had first discovered Realm Lords in the past, they had avoided these monsters as much as possible. Unfortunately, some battles were unavoidable, and players had been forced to kill certain Realm Lords. As players had killed more Realm Lords, they discovered something astonishing. The Mana Barrier Crystal Fragment. Only Realm Lords dropped this item, and there was no way to obtain the crystal fragments from other monsters. On its own, the Mana Barrier Crystal Fragment did not possess much of a function. At most, it could be used as a support material when crafting weapons and equipment, but when players synthesized the Mana Barrier Crystal Fragments into Mana Barrier Crystals, their value rose by over 100-fold. The Mana Barrier Crystals were the various NPC cities' main power source for their teleportation magic arrays. Not only did the mana barrier crystal contain a frightening amount of mana, but it could also replenish itself by absorbing the mana around it. Only the mana barrier crystal required a considerably long time to replenish itself. However, this replenishment time would vary depending on the mana density around it. In an ordinary environment, for example, an empty mana barrier crystal would require 48 hours to recover fully. To put it simply, a mana barrier crystal was akin to an everlasting magic crystal. It was the perfect power source for teleportation arrays. With enough mana barrier crystals, one could operate a teleportation array for no cost. It was easy to imagine how valuable these mana barrier crystals were. After all, mana barrier crystals were not that easy to obtain, yet the various large guilds and players were in dire need of them. Meanwhile, the special elite-ranked Realm Lord before Shifeng was a walking mana source. Without hesitation, he charged forward, showing no intentions of circling the Spectre Werewolf and leaving the Divine Shrine. As Shifeng boldly approached, the Spectre Werewolf howled in anger. It raised its great sword and swung the massive weapon at the impudent intruder. Over a dozen magical wind blades formed before the Spectre Werewolf and shot toward Shifeng. The attacks were spread out, making it impossible for Shifeng to dodge them all. Fortunately, the Disintegration armor wasn't currently suppressing Shifeng's basic attributes. In other words, his strength was even higher than a great lord's of the same level. Hence, although the Spectre Werewolf's Realm Lord status enhanced its wind blades, and the attack nearly rivaled the power of a Tier 2 spell, they were insignificant to Shifeng. Sword's Orbit. A galaxy of stars formed around Shifeng, striking down the approaching wind blades. Shifeng didn't even pause as he continued towards the Spectre Werewolf. Shadow Blade. Thunder Flame Explosion. Flame Burst. When Shifeng reached the Spectre Werewolf and began to bombard it with attacks, the Special Elite's 4,200,000 HP drained like flowing water. Despite the Spectre Werewolf's struggles to fight back, it was powerless to change its fate. In the end, Shifeng's swords devoured its HP. It then collapsed, transforming into a dark mist and scattering in the wind. The berserk mana which had surrounded the Spectre Werewolf calmed as a result. At the same time, a pair of level 50 bronze plate armor boots, a dark crystal shard and several dozen copper coins appeared on the ground. Although the loot was not particularly impressive, Shifeng's eyes glowed when he saw the dark crystal shard. This shard was none other than the mana barrier crystal fragment. Chapter 1572, Blackwater Visits. Chapter 1572, Blackwater Visits. Sure enough, the Divine Shrine's tests are also opportunities. Shifeng smiled as he collected the mana barrier crystal fragment. Mana barrier crystal fragment, consumable, can be used to increase mana, a support tool for crafting items. Obtaining mana barrier crystal fragments wasn't easy, and although the item had a high drop rate, it didn't drop from every Realm Lord. Meanwhile, Realm Lords were even rarer than field bosses. High-resource leveling maps only had 2 or 3 Realm Lords. In addition, these Realm Lords' respawn time was much longer than ordinary field bosses. When the various large guilds had discovered the benefits of killing Realm Lords in the past, many guild wars had broken out over these monsters. Obtaining 1 mana barrier crystal fragment after killing a single special elite-ranked Realm Lord was a huge boon from the system. Each mana barrier crystal fragment had sold for around 30 gold in the past. Of course, most guilds that had obtained these crystal shards had refused to sell them. When players collected 10 crystal fragments, they could seek out an NPC master alchemist to synthesize the mana barrier crystal with a 40% success rate. If the synthesis were successful, one would have an everlasting magic crystal. The mana barrier crystal was a priceless treasure, useful in multiple aspects, such as powering teleportation arrays, magic towers and other such constructions. There had even been a few workshops that had specialized in hunting Realm Lords in distant maps, making a living from selling mana barrier crystals. After obtaining the crystal fragment, Shifeng moved towards the teleportation array and left the forest. When he opened his eyes again, he had arrived at the first Divine Shrine's exit, and the staircase leading to the second shrine stretched before him. Many players were already running towards the second Divine Shrine. So many people are already out? Shifeng was surprised. Over 100 players were already approaching the second Divine Shrine. However, after giving the matter some thought, he realized that he had spent quite some time fighting the Spectre Werewolf. Most, if not all, of the players before him had likely avoided fighting the Realm Lord. They had simply slipped past the Spectre Werewolf to enter the teleportation array. As Shi Feng left the first divine shrine, the sound of system notifications reached his ears. System, congratulations. You have passed the divine shrine. Rewarding 10 shrine points. System, congratulations. You have passed the divine shrine within the time limit. Rewarding 10 shrine points. System, congratulations. You have killed the guardian boss within the time limit. Rewarding 50 shrine points. So many points. Shi Feng was somewhat taken aback when he saw how many points the system had awarded for killing the Spectre Werewolf. Passing the divine shrine had only earned him 10 SPs, yet killing the special elite ranked Spectre Werewolf had awarded 50. If these other players realized that killing the guardian boss would award even more points, they'd likely regret their earlier actions. Even the cheapest item available for purchase in the divine shrine cost 500 SPs. If one cleared the first divine shrine quickly and ignored killing the guardian boss, they would only receive 20 SPs. With that method, who knew how many divine shrines one would have to clear to accumulate 500 SPs? Moreover, as players climbed the divine staircase, the divine shrines would become more challenging. If players did not earn as many points as possible early on, it would only become more difficult to earn the points they needed later. It seems that I'll have to defeat every divine shrine's guardian boss. Thinking up to this point, Shi Feng realized the fastest way to earn shrine points from the divine staircase. Following which, he proceeded towards the second divine shrine. The second shrine contained a gravel ridge, and its monsters ranged between level 55 and 58. However, the second shrine had far fewer elite monsters, and nearly half the shrine's monsters were special elites. Next to the Realm Lord, a few level 58 elites guarded the teleportation array. To Shi Feng, however, this slight increase in difficulty was no issue. He had only spent a few minutes to defeat the Realm Lord and 3 elites. This time, however, he did not obtain a mana barrier crystal fragment. He had only obtained a level 55 bronze mage top and some coins. Upon clearing the second divine shrine, Shi Feng earned 15 SPs. He also received 15 SPs for clearing the shrine within the time limit, and 70 SPs for killing the guardian boss. Although Shi Feng had cleared the second divine shrine, he was clearly lagging behind the other players. Even those who had entered the first divine shrine sometime after him were already on their way towards the third shrine. However, Shi Feng did not rush. Instead, he continued to ascend the divine staircase at his own pace. Each divine shrine was a little more challenging than the last and awarded 5 more SPs when cleared. When Shi Feng entered the 5th divine shrine, the test's difficulty visibly increased. Now, every monster he faced was a special elite. In terms of attributes, the monsters were on par with well-equipped, Tier 1 players of the same level. When facing a dozen or so of these monsters at once, even elite players would be in a bind. Even the guardian boss was now a chieftain-ranked realm lord. Not only did the chieftain possess 10 million HP, but its skills also carried great destructive power. Even Shi Feng did not dare to meet the boss's attacks head-on. Shi Feng only defeated this guardian boss after a dozen or so minutes of fighting. Meanwhile, as a chieftain-ranked realm lord, the boss had been very generous. It had dropped 2 mana barrier crystal fragments, instantly increasing Shi Feng's haul to 4. Now he only needed 6 more fragments to synthesize a mana barrier crystal. When Shi Feng had cleared the 5th divine shrine, the shrine points he earned also undergone a qualitative transformation. The clear reward alone rose to 100 SPs, while clearing the shrine within the time limit awarded another 100 SPs, and killing the guardian boss within the time limit awarded 500 SPs. However, the ranking list before the various divine shrines also reported that players had already reached the 8th shrine. There were over a dozen players clearing the shrines with astonishing speed. Meanwhile, while Shi Feng continued to challenge divine shrines, Zero Wing City's fame in Starmoon Kingdom had exceeded Stone Forest towns. The city had become a holy resting ground for many of the kingdom's players. Due to the city's high mana density, the double EXP buff accumulation, and the large number of wandering merchants, it took no time at all for Zero Wing City's player population to break past 1 million. The originally empty city was now so lively that Zero Wing City could rival major NPC cities. Guild Leader Singular, Zero Wing City's player population has grown past 1 million. The city is even charging players an entrance fee. Its daily income is incredibly high. With this, I don't think that it'll be easy to whittle Zero Wing down anymore, Lei Jingyang reported. He currently rested in one of Zero Wing City's restaurants, wearing a frown as he watched the crowded street outside. Initially he hadn't cared about Zero Wing City, but after visiting the city personally, he had to admit that it was extraordinary. Young Master Lei, although Zero Wing City is better than we expected, Zero Wing's celebration of the fact will be short-lived. Singular Burial chuckled. He didn't seem to mind the fact that Zero Wing City earned considerable wealth for the guild. Don't tell me you plan to fight it out with Zero Wing? Lei Jingyang frowned at Singular Burial's reaction. He had expected Singular Burial to finish Zero Wing off in a few more days, but clearly that plan was no longer viable. Not only did Zero Wing City earn a considerable amount of profit for its ruling guild, but the city improved Zero Wing's reputation among players. At this rate, Heaven's Burial could never destroy Zero Wing in a short 3 to 5 days. Of course not, Singular Burial said, shaking his head. Although Zero Wing has achieved great success, at the end of the day, its foundations are shaky. The nail that sticks out gets hammered down. Representatives from the Blackwater Corporation contacted me not long ago, informing me that they are willing to help us against Zero Wing. The Blackwater Corporation? Lei Jingyang was visibly moved when he heard this. Why are they suddenly interested in Zero Wing? The Blackwater Guild had changed drastically. It now had stronger forces under its command and ample funding. Just some time ago, it had even established a guild town in a resource-rich, neutral map. Even super guilds avoided any conflict with the guild. I don't know why either, but this doesn't change our plans to take down Zero Wing, Singular Burial said, chuckling. Taking a look at the time, he continued, Blackwater's representatives should have arrived in Starmoon City by now. I should return to meet with them. Suddenly, Aqua Rose, who was currently busy managing Zero Wing City, received a message from Yaya stating, Big Sis Aqua, a few people claiming to be representatives from the Blackwater Corporation have requested a meeting with our guild's upper echelons. Should I have them wait in the guild residence? Chapter 1573, Domineering Aqua Rose. Blackwater? Why are they here? Aqua Rose grew curious as she read Yaya's message. It had been quite some time since Zero Wing had dealt with the Blackwater Corporation. According to her information, Abandoned Wave's actions had only been the Blackwater Corporation's attempt to test God's domain's waters. Afterward, the events with Zero Wing, Blackwater quickly gave up on Abandoned Wave, and the man had vanished without a trace. Blackwater then focused its development in the distant Iron Empire, taking control of the Empire after forcing several superpowers out of the competition. Logically, Blackwater should have no reason to leave the safety of the Iron Empire and travel all the way to Starmoon Kingdom to seek out Zero Wing. Hence, Aqua Rose found the situation strange. However, Aqua Rose decided to send Yaya to entertain Blackwater's representatives while they waited in one of the guild residence's reception rooms. She then dropped what she was doing and made her way to meet these individuals. A man and a woman waited in one of the elegant guild residence reception rooms in Zero Wing City. Zero Wing's elite members, who had been sent to wait on these two, stood quietly in the corner of the room, clearly tense. These elite members weren't tense just because of the two visitors' extraordinary identities, but because of the chilling aura they radiated. They could not help but feel like they stood before a pair of lions as they involuntarily shuddered. Moreover, both representatives were very high-leveled. The man was a level 49 elementalist, and the woman was a level 48 shield warrior. Even the most inferior piece of equipment these two wore was level 45 dark gold rank. The male elementalist even wore 3 pieces of epic equipment, appearing as if he were wrapped in a constant layer of fire. In fact, due to this man's presence, the reception room's temperature had risen quite a bit. When Aqua Rose and Yaya entered the room, the man's aura flared with even greater intensity. It was clear he wanted to intimidate Aqua Rose. Unfortunately for him, his biting cold aura had no effect on the Zero Wing Vice Guild leader. Hello, I am Aqua Rose, one of Zero Wing's Vice Guild leaders. May I know what business Blackwater has with our guild? Aqua Rose asked, smiling at the male elementalist with the intimidating aura. As expected of Zero Wing's Vice Guild leader, your guild's reputation is well deserved. The male elementalist praised when he saw the lack of hesitation in Aqua Rose's response to his intimidation. I had thought that our guild leader's decision to send us as representatives was unnecessary. However, it seems that Zero Wing indeed qualifies for such a move. Thank you for the praise. Now, may I know what business your guild has with Zero Wing? Aqua Rose calmly repeated, paying the male elementalist's arrogance no heed. Moreover, the man before her earned his arrogance. Aside from the fact that this man was backed by the Blackwater Corporation, he radiated an aura that felt dangerous to Aqua Rose. After her promotion to Tier 2, she rarely felt such a feeling from other players, and any player who felt this way was a peak expert, capable of holding important positions in super guilds. My name is Falling Fire, the Vice Commander of Blackwater's 3rd Main Force. I have come here with a message for Zero Wing from our guild leader. Hand over Yulan and her companions which you have chosen to shelter and half of Zero Wing City's profits. Do that and we can ignore the previous events. Otherwise, deal with the consequences at your risk, the man named Falling Fire informed Aqua Rose. Smiling, he continued, although your guild has performed well in a few major wars thus far, your strength is only effective against small guilds. We'll give you 1 day to consider our offer. I'll be waiting for your reply. Hand over Yulan and the others? As Aqua Rose listened to Falling Fire's message, she came to understand the gist of the situation. When she realized what Shi Feng had done, she was flabbergasted. It was no wonder why Yulan had seemed so worried. It turned out that she was wanted by Blackwater. That's right. You only have 1 day to consider. As for Zero Wing City's profits, I'll send specialists to keep an eye on your city. Falling Fire nodded. In his opinion, Blackwater had no reason to go out of its way to warn Zero Wing. With the guild's strength, it could easily flatten this small, upstart guild. While Zero Wing's past performance had been astonishing, that only held true for first-rate guilds and smaller. To superpowers like Blackwater, Zero Wing was insignificant. Furthermore, Zero Wing was currently preoccupied with its war against Heaven's Burial. 1 day to consider handing over Yolan's group and half of Zero Wing City's profits? Aqua Rose could not help but laugh when she heard Falling Fire's words. I see. I understand now. Since that is the case, you two may return to your guild. What do you mean by that? Falling Fire's expression darkened when he saw the woman's smile. What do I mean? Have I not made myself clear enough? You can return and tell that guild leader of yours that he can forget obtaining 50% of Zero Wing City's profits. As for Yolan's group, they have already joined Zero Wing. You're even less likely to take them from us. If Blackwater is looking for an opponent, although Zero Wing is very weak, we are more than willing to keep you company. Aqua Rose said straightforwardly. Watch your step on your way out. I won't be sending you off. When Aqua Rose finished speaking, the reception room was deathly silent. Falling Fire stared at Aqua Rose in shock. He even wondered if he had heard her wrong. Zero Wing was in the middle of a war of attrition with Heaven's Burial. Now it dared to declare war on Blackwater. Even Yaya, who silently stood beside Aqua Rose, gaped in astonishment. She had never realized that her vice-guild leader was so domineering. The Blackwater Corporation was a titan both in and out of God's domain. In the real world, it was an incredibly famous international corporation. In God's domain, it had successfully wrestled control of the Iron Empire from several superpowers. Zero Wing simply couldn't compare. Good. Very good. Since Zero Wing dares to cast aside the opportunity we've presented, you can wait until we remove your name from God's domain. Falling Fire sneered at his host. Immediately, he and the level 48 female shield warrior stood and left the room. After the duo from Blackwater left, Yaya turned to Aqua Rose with a reverent expression. Big sis Aqua, you're so amazing. You even slapped Blackwater in the face. The look on that guy's face just now was priceless. Yaya said with admiration flashing in her eyes. That's right. It felt wonderful putting those bastards in their place. However, how am I supposed to report this to the guild leader? Aqua Rose felt a headache begin to brew. For a moment of satisfaction, she had declared war on Blackwater without consulting Shi Feng. Zero Wing City was just starting to get on the right track. The wealth the city earned even allowed Zero Wing to fight Heaven's Burial on equal footing, but if Blackwater joined the fray, Zero Wing would be at a severe disadvantage. Meanwhile, back in the World Summit's Divine Staircase, Shi Feng had finally defeated the 10th Divine Shrine's guardian boss, a level 60, Lord-ranked 5-headed demon snake. Before landing the killing blow, he had made sure to activate Divine Providence. When the 5-headed demon snake died, items rained from the sky. Normally, level 50 monsters and above had significantly reduced drop rates. However, the demon snake had dropped over 20 items. No Lord-ranked monster of this level should be capable of dropping so many. A jackpot? Shi Feng was overjoyed when he saw the loot on the ground. He had only used Divine Providence to increase his chances of obtaining mana barrier crystal fragments, yet he had triggered a jackpot. He truly hadn't expected such a bountiful reward. In God's domain, jackpots were exceedingly rare from monsters past level 50, much less from realm lords. Chapter 1574, Advanced Forging Design. Aside from weapons, equipment, and mana barrier crystal fragments, a tattered sheet of parchment rested among the many items the five-headed demon snake had dropped. As the parchment itself was very high quality, it still radiated faint pulses of mana despite the ravages of time. Shifeng picked up the parchment out of curiosity. This is an advanced forging design. Shifeng was elated when he realized what this sheet of parchment was. In God's domain, every advanced design was extremely rare and valuable. This was because advanced designs contain techniques unknown to the general public. For example, an advanced forging design would contain a few different kinds of advanced forging techniques. If players learn these techniques, they'd increase their chances of creating a new item in the future. The various large guilds had cherished their advanced designs in the past. They had all refused to sell these designs. At the same time, the large guilds trading firms had fought over these items. Zero Wing had only obtained a few advanced designs thus far, including advanced forging designs. Moreover, the design in his hands was not just any ordinary advanced forging design. Conqueror's Armor Forging Design Fragment, Advanced Design, Fine Gold Rank. When learned, you will be able to produce the level 50 magic rune armor. Every piece of crafted armor contains a magic array. 5 pieces can be used to form the basic strength battle array. Current fragment count 1/9. I never expected the divine shrines to drop something like this. I've really lucked out this time. Shifeng was at a loss for words as he stared at the Conqueror's armor design. Not only had the five-headed demon snake dropped 2 mana barrier crystal fragments, but it had also dropped a fine gold equipment design that came with a battle array. Killing the demon snake had been far more profitable than killing a level 60 Grand Lord. A well-equipped peak expert in God's domain wasn't a force to be reckoned with. In fact, despite being an individual, they were capable of playing a significant role in a guild war. However, that did not mean ordinary players were utterly helpless against peak experts. Ordinary players still had a method they could use to fight peak experts. Battle arrays. If a certain number of players wore equipment with the same battle array, they could trigger the battle array's effects, significantly increasing their combat power. Battle arrays provided more than just a boost to basic attributes. They also improved players' physiques. Most importantly, it allowed players with the same array to share their perception. This helped players remove defensive blind spots, visibly improving their combat standards. Although a basic battle array only allowed players to share a limited degree of their perception, it still elevated players' combat standards to a whole new level. Many of God's domain's small guilds in the past had survived and thrived, even after 10 years, precisely because of battle arrays. Even without peak experts, guilds with powerful battle arrays could take down a peak expert with just a few players or a dozen or so working together. Some small guilds had even stood toe-to-toe with large guilds by relying on these arrays. Of course, battle arrays were not without weaknesses. In exchange for the huge boost in strength, players' stamina and concentration consumption increased massively. When players activated a battle array, their stamina and concentration would deplete several times faster than normal. This limited the amount of time that players had when using battle arrays. However, despite such a glaring flaw, battle arrays had been highly sought after by many guilds. Equipment with battle arrays was extremely rare, and usually only dropped from super large-scale team dungeons. Monsters in the fields had no chance of dropping such items. Moreover, the higher quality a piece of battle array equipment was, the more valuable it was. A piece of battle array equipment could easily sell for several times more than a piece of equipment of the same rank. Although he had only obtained a fragment of a level 50 fine gold battle array equipment design, it was still quite valuable. If he completed the design, its value would be immeasurable. Since the Divine Shrine's Guardian boss dropped a fragment, the other shrines bosses should have a chance of dropping them as well. As Shifeng examined the Conqueror's armor design, he inwardly swore to complete it no matter what. Immediately, he moved towards the teleportation array and proceeded to the next Divine Shrine. By the time Shifeng appeared on the staircase leading to the 11th Divine Shrine, players had already reached the 15th. He was far behind. System, congratulations. You have passed the Divine Shrine, rewarding 300 shrine points. System, congratulations. You have passed the Divine Shrine within the time limit, rewarding 300 shrine points. System, congratulations. You have killed the Guardian boss within the time limit, rewarding 2,000 shrine points. However, although other players progressed faster than he did, Shifeng contained the most SPs of any player in the World Summit. Currently, Shifeng had already accumulated 8,960 SPs. If players ascended the Divine Staircase without defeating the Guardian bosses, even after reaching the 15th Divine Shrine, they would not have even half of Shifeng's points. Time passed quickly, and the Divine Shrines became more difficult as Shifeng climbed the Divine Staircase. By the time Shifeng reached the 15th Divine Shrine, he had to face a Lord-ranked Realm Lord with a special bloodline. By the time he emerged from the 15th Shrine, many players had been eliminated in the 20th Shrine. As Shifeng had guessed, the other Shrine's Guardian bosses had a chance of dropping the Conqueror's armor-forging design fragment if he activated Divine Providence when he killed them. By the time he had cleared the 15th Divine Shrine, he had gained another fragment. He just needed to wait for Divine Providence's cooldown to end before proceeding to the next Divine Shrine. As for Mana Barrier Crystal fragments, he now had 17. However, Shifeng had grown a bit weary after fighting for so long. Taking a look at the time, he realized how long he had spent in God's domain. He then consumed a drop of life essence from the blood refining crystal to boost his stamina and concentration recovery before logging out of the game. Players' accumulated time in the World Summit only decreased when players were online. Logging off to rest would not affect one's progress. Hence, to maintain their combat efficiency, many players had long since chosen to log out. After all, challenging the Divine Staircase was a long and arduous progress, and as one climbed the staircase, they'd have to navigate larger maps in the Divine Shrines. As a result, players had to spend more time clearing the shrines. By the time Shifeng logged out, the sun had risen high into the sky. The moment Shifeng's consciousness returned to his body, he was bombarded by a series of messages and call notifications. There were messages and calls from both Blackie and Aqua Rose. In fact, Shifeng received another call from Aqua Rose before he had the chance to leave his gaming cabin. What's with the urgency? Has something happened? Shifeng curiously asked after accepting the call. Guild leader, you finally picked up. Any later and I would have sent Blackie to look for you in person, Aqua Rose said somewhat anxiously. While you were gone, Zero Wing City has developed nicely. The player population has already broken past the 1 million threshold. Once we finish constructing the NPC shops, the city will attract even more players. But some time ago, 2 representatives from the Blackwater Corporation sought me out. They told us to hand over Yulan and her companions and 50% of Zero Wing City's income as compensation. Otherwise, they'll turn the full might of the Blackwater Guild against us. Hand over Yulan, her companions, and 50% of Zero Wing City's profits? Shifeng frowned. The Blackwater Corporation's retaliation didn't surprise him in the least, but he didn't expect Blackwater to take action so quickly. Moreover, the corporation's timing couldn't be worse, targeting them while they were in a war of attrition against Heaven's Burial. This put Zero Wing at a considerable disadvantage. Chapter 1575. Nurturing Experts. It seems that I'll need to speed things up, Shifeng thought after hearing Aqua Rose's report. He was quite familiar with the Blackwater Corporation's power. He had witnessed its rise in God's domain in the past. Despite joining God's domain so late, Blackwater had still developed into a super guild quite quickly in the past. One could just imagine how frightening Blackwater's potential was. Furthermore, the Blackwater Corporation had invested in God's domain much earlier in this life. Blackwater's experts had already caught up with God's domain's mainstream players. Otherwise, it wouldn't have stood a chance against the other superpowers vying for the Iron Empire. Of course, Zero Wing didn't have much to be afraid of if the Blackwater Corporation focused on its development in the Iron Empire. Based on what he heard from Yulan, the guild had only recently taken control of the empire. The guild was just starting to expand. Although Blackwater possessed plenty of experts and funding, it lacked the power to spread its influence across multiple kingdoms and empires as the various super first-rate and super guilds had. While the organization might be able to deal with small guilds right now, it couldn't touch Zero Wing. Unfortunately, that was only true if Blackwater worked alone. If it worked with Heaven's Burial, Zero Wing's situation would take a turn for the worst. Blackwater could leave the reconnaissance to Heaven's Burial while it supplied the guild with a large number of experts. Currently, players who wanted to grind and level up had to travel to distant maps, and most of the high-level maps weren't concentrated in a single area. Even if Shifeng used the 7 Luminaries ring space movement, it would take a considerable amount of time to travel from one high-level map to another. How much time have they given us to consider? Shifeng asked. 1 day, but I let my anger get the best of me and I rejected their offer instantly, Aqua Rose said in a subdued voice. You rejected them? Shifeng stared at Aqua Rose in surprise. Did you really reject them? MHM. Aqua Rose nodded silently, knowing that she had made a huge mess of things. By outright rejecting Blackwater's offer, she had undoubtedly created another powerful enemy for Zero Wing. Ah, good. Well done. Shifeng could not help but laugh when he saw Aqua Rose's guilty expression. Although Zero Wing is not very strong, we're never afraid of a challenge. If they want to come, let them. We'll fight it out. Guild leader, Aqua Rose felt guilty and slightly touched by Shifeng's words. Not only didn't he blame her in the slightest, but he also actively encouraged her. Alright, don't worry about it. This isn't the first time we've fought a superpower, Shifeng said, shrugging. But be careful this time. Keep an eye on their movement at all times. Also, we need to push our guild members to complete their Tier 2 promotions. Every bit of help is useful. Have our guild's internal members focus on leveling quickly, so they can add to the guild's combat power. MHM. I'll prepare some top-tier equipment, magic scrolls, and advanced potions for our guild members to challenge their promotion quests. As for the guild's internal members, I'll help them level up with Summer, Aqua Rose said, nodding. Following which, Shifeng mentioned a few good grinding locations for Aqua Rose to use as she helped power level Zero Wing's internal members. The guild's internal members already had solid combat standards, they only lacked levels. Once they were brought up to speed, Zero Wing would have another batch of expert players to help defend it. When Shifeng finished his call with Aqua Rose, he proceeded to train with the guild's internal members. To help them improve faster, Shifeng even provided specific guidance to a few talented members. He even went so far as to use the 10 additional black cards he had acquired from the secret pavilion to train Yu Zipping and a few others. In such a way, Shifeng trained Yu Zipping and the other internal members during the day. When the sun set, he'd log back into God's domain and grind through the divine staircase. The greatest problem other players in the World Summit faced was the drain on their stamina and concentration, but Shifeng could rely on his life essence to boost his recovery rate, having no issues in this regard. The only real problem was the divine shrine's increasing difficulty. As a result, Shifeng had to take more time to clear each shrine. Initially, he had only spent 30 minutes on each divine shrine, though he spent most of that time waiting for Divine Providence's 30-minute cooldown to end. As he ascended the divine staircase, however, the amount of time he needed to clear each shrine gradually increased to 2, then 3 hours. After grinding for 4 consecutive days, Shifeng finally defeated the 29th Shrine's Guardian boss, a Great Lord-ranked Realm Lord. He had initially assumed that he'd earn more shrine points from each subsequent divine shrine he cleared, but that wasn't entirely the case. After the 10th divine shrine, the SP reward only increased once every 5 divine shrines, yet these shrines' difficulty constantly increased as he cleared the last. By the time Shifeng cleared the 29th divine shrine, he had only accumulated 86,360 shrine points. He was still roughly 14,000 points away from affording the cheapest bloodline. Fortunately, although he hadn't acquired as many shrine points as he had hoped, he had secured a decent number of mana barrier crystal fragments. When High Lord and Great Lord ranked Guardian bosses died, they'd drop at least 1 crystal fragment, but he had obtained up to 3 crystal fragments from a single boss. As a result, he had a total of 43 mana barrier crystal fragments. As for the Conqueror's armor design, he had collected 6 fragments thus far. He was only 3 fragments away from completing the design. He had also obtained over 100 level 50 to level 55 weapons and equipment. Their ranks ranged between bronze and secret silver, and although they weren't top tier, they were rare and valuable at this stage of the game. During this time, the White Tiger Dojo had also delivered the previously agreed 50 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid and 20 million credits. Upon receiving the payment, Shifeng assigned Shadow Sword to take charge of the 500 apprentices from the dojo. These apprentices would train in Zero Wing City's battle arena, improve their skill completion rates in Stone Forest Town's advanced combat rooms, and level while grinding and questing each day. As a result, their combat standards steadily rose with each passing day. Unfortunately, Zero Wings members had encountered group skirmishes with Blackwater and Heaven's Burial's experts in the fields, increasing the guild's expenditures. Despite the massive revenue source Zero Wing City had become, the situation took a heavy toll on the guild's funds. However, monetary compensation wasn't the guild's biggest problem, but the loss of top-tier weapons and equipment. Meanwhile, the guild only had a few teams capable of acquiring such items. Although Aqua Rose and the other core members had formed teams to hunt down the enemy experts, they hadn't obtained enough level 45 top-tier equipment to replenish the guild stock. Guild leader, I'm afraid that our stock of level 45 top-tier equipment in the guild warehouse will run out at this rate. Many of the other large guilds in the kingdom have already surpassed our raid progress in level 50 team dungeons, Aqua Rose reported, clearly frustrated. Moreover, based on the latest reports, it seems that Blackwater has sent over 4,000 experts to target our players. Including Heaven's Burial's experts, our teams are suffering a massive disadvantage while grinding in the fields. If Sherfone were present, they might be able to slaughter Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's experts a few times by relying on his spatial gate, which would, more or less, make up for the guild's losses. Zero Wings members were constantly ambushed in the fields, yet Tier 2 experts like her were limited in their ability to fend off every ambush. Unless their guild members stopped leveling and questing, there'd be no end to this problem. Moreover, level 45 top-tier equipment was required to raid level 50 team dungeons. If the guild warehouse ran out of such equipment, they'd have to stop raiding these dungeons. If this persisted, guild members might even lose interest in earning guild contribution points. If that happened, the guild would fall apart. Have Melancholic and the others focus on crafting level 45 equipment, and temporarily stop sales on level 45 secret silver and fine gold equipment. Use some of that stock to replenish the guild warehouse. If worst comes to worst, have Snow send some level 45 top-tier equipment from the branch guild, Sherfong said after giving the matter some thought. He had never expected Blackwater to be ruthless enough to send 4,000 experts. To make matters worse, that wasn't the guild's full strength. Blackwater's foundations had truly exceeded his expectations. Sherfong jumped back into his virtual gaming cabin, ignoring the fact that it was currently daytime and he was supposed to be resting. After logging back into God's domain, he immediately made his way to the 30th Divine Shrine. Chapter 1576, Divine Shrine's Opportunity. Once Sherfong entered the 30th Divine Shrine, the space before him transformed. Currently he faced a dark cavern. The cavern was very large as a sports arena. Moreover, many tunnels led out of it. From time to time he also spotted one or two lizardman patrol squads moving in and out of these tunnels. Even the weakest lizardman in these patrol squads was a level 58 special elite, while the strongest was a level 60 lord. The raid difficulty really has increased quite significantly. Sherfong frowned slightly as he observed the lizardmen. It's no wonder so many expert demon players had to stop after reaching the 30th shrine. Previously, even the strongest non-boss monster in the 29th Divine Shrine was only a level 60 chieftain. In God's domain, chieftain-ranked monsters were at the Tier 1 standard. Hence, current players, particularly demon players, could still have a relatively easy time dealing with chieftains. However, when a monster reached the Lord rank, they attained the Tier 2 standard and were capable of using Tier 2 skills. It might be fine if all a demon player had to deal with were 2 or 3 lords. The crucial point was that, based on what Sherfong could see, there was a total of 30 lord-ranked lizardmen patrolling in the cavern alone. If one entered the tunnels, who knew how many more lords they would encounter? Against 30 lord-ranked monsters, even a Tier 2 player would get overwhelmed easily, not to mention a Tier 1 player. An ordinary Tier 1 expert would be fortunate if they could survive even 10 seconds against such a large number of lords. It was no wonder many experts in the World Summit had their progress climbing the Divine Staircase halted at the 30th Divine Shrine. Currently, based on the ranking list Sherfong saw before he entered the 30th Divine Shrine, only 5 players had successfully passed the 30th Divine Shrine. After observing the patrol routes of the lizardmen, Sherfong activated the 7 Luminaries Rings aura of wind and dashed towards the tunnel that the system map indicated provided access to the heart of the cave system. The patrol squads in the cavern moved in fixed patterns. From observation, Shifeng found out that there would not always be 30 patrol squads moving inside the cavern but only around 4 to 10 patrol squads most of the time. As long as he used the opportunity when only 4 patrol squads were present to enter the tunnel leading to the core area, he would attract the attention of only 2 lizardman patrol squads at most. In the next moment, Shifeng transformed into an afterimage as he dashed past 1 lizardman patrol squad. By the time the patrol squad reacted, Shifeng was already several yards beyond it. Very quickly, he zipped by the 2nd patrol squad as well and entered the core tunnel. However, the moment Shifeng set foot in the core tunnel, he felt the threat of death. Traps. As soon as Shifeng entered the tunnel, dozens of small magic arrays appeared along the tunnel walls. In the next moment, these magic arrays launched magical bolts of various elements. Although these magical bolts did not seem very powerful, each one contained enough power to rival a Tier 3 spell. Even a Tier 1 player geared in top-tier equipment would be killed instantly if struck by these bolts. In addition to these attacks, there were also 2 patrol squads of lizard men chasing after him. Sure enough, the difficulty is very high. Upon seeing the dozens of magical bolts flying at him, Shifeng immediately understood the reason why so few demon players had made it through the 30th Divine Shrine. He quickly executed Sword's Orbit, striking down the bolts one after another as he continued advancing down the tunnel. Fortunately, the activated traps were effective not just against players but the lizard men as well. When the lizard men entered the tunnel, they were promptly bombarded by magical bolts from the traps Shifeng triggered, and sent flying back out of the tunnel. As the lizard men had relatively high HP, they managed to survive even after being struck by what was effectively a Tier 3 spell. However, this situation also prevented them from pursuing Shifeng. Thus, they could only watch as Shifeng gradually disappeared from their sight. The path leading towards the core of the cave system was replete with various kinds of traps. From time to time, Shifeng would also come across other lizardman patrol squads. As a result, he progressed towards the core at a snail's pace. After walking for over 2 hours, he arrived at a spacious cavern with a stone altar sitting in the middle of it. Stone pillars carved with magic runes surrounded the altar. Meanwhile, above the altar was the teleportation array leading out of the divine shrine. At this moment, however, lizard men were kneeling around the altar. At a glance, Shifeng spotted over 300 lizard men. Although the majority of these lizard men were only elite ranked, there were 9 lord-ranked lizard men in the mix. However, the lord-ranked lizard men were no longer the strongest monsters present, which was instead the staff-wielding lizard man standing at the stone altar. Currently, the staff-wielding lizard man appeared to be offering a prayer of sorts. Lizard man Chief, Realm Lord. Humanoid creature, Grand Lord. Level 60 HP 42, 000/000/42, 000/000. Shifeng could not help but frown as he looked at the lizard man chief. The guardian boss of the 29th Divine Shrine had been only a level 60 Great Lord. Yet, in the 30th Divine Shrine the guardian boss had actually become a Grand Lord. The increase in difficulty utterly exceeded Shifeng's expectations. Although the Lizardman Chief did not possess the HP of an ordinary Grand Lord of the same level, the enhanced spells of a Grand Lord ranked Realm Lord was no laughing matter. Even if Shifeng successfully blocked one of the Lizardman Chief's spell attacks with his weapons, there was a high chance that he would end up losing his life. Seeing this, Shifeng could not help but hesitate whether he should bypass the Lizardman Chief and head straight for the teleportation array or stay behind and defeat the Guardian boss. He was fully confident of directly passing the 30th Divine Shrine while keeping his life intact. However, he could not say the same if he chose to fight the Lizardman Chief. While he did not mind losing one challenge opportunity, he did have 10 chances after all. The crucial point was that players would still lose a level if they died inside the Divine Shrines. Fortunately, though, no items would drop upon death. A Grand Lord was an existence that served as the final boss of Team Dungeons. It was practically impossible for players to solo such an existence. Just as Shifeng was mulling over his options, the Lizardman Chief suddenly started chanting an incantation. The runes carved on the stone altar then lit up with a dark blue glow. The space above the Lizardman Chief also collapsed, forming a tunnel of sorts into the dark void. Immediately after, a golden tablet slowly descended from this shattered space. The moment this golden tablet appeared, the mana inside the entire cavern stirred. The tablet itself also released a powerful divine might that put immense pressure on the living creatures around it. This is a legacy tablet? Shifeng's eyes focused on the golden tablet. For a moment he even thought they were playing tricks on him. He had acquired quite a few legacy tablets thus far. Meanwhile, every tablet was a treasure that allowed players to learn combat techniques. However, the tablets he possessed were just bronze and silver ranked. Thus far he had only seen one gold tablet before. Moreover, the said tablet had even been stolen by a mysterious Tier 5 NPC. One could just imagine the value of a gold-ranked secret technique tablet. Just as Shifeng was feeling surprised at the appearance of the gold tablet, the Lizardman chief extended his hands and received the tablet. He then started chanting another incantation. This time, the Lizardman chief caused an even greater commotion. The mana inside the entire cavern gathered at the stone altar and became so dense that it started transforming into white mist. At the same time, a threefold magic array also formed on the ground the stone altar sat on. This is a space-time teleportation magic array? What is he trying to do? Could he be trying to send the gold tablet to another location? Shifeng was very familiar with the threefold magic array that formed beneath the stone altar. However, he did not believe that the Lizardman chief was going to leave the divine shrine. Hence, there was only one other possibility why the Lizardman chief would need a teleportation array, to send something away. Since the Lizardman chief had summoned the teleportation array immediately after receiving the gold tablet, it was highly likely that the Realm Lord was planning on sending the gold tablet away. This won't do. I can't let him send the gold tablet away. Shifeng steeled his heart and started sneaking his way over to the Lizardman chief. A gold tablet was incomparably valuable. It was not something that bronze and silver tablets could compare to. Just a silver tablet was already enough to prompt the various superpowers to bloody one another's noses, all the more a gold tablet. If he missed out on this opportunity, who knew how long it would take before he came across another gold tablet. In fact, he might never come across another gold tablet again. Moreover, the divine staircase became increasingly difficult the higher one ascended. If he could not defeat the Lizardman chief, then it was even less likely that he could defeat the guardian bosses of the subsequent divine shrines. Just as the Lizardman chief was about to send the gold tablet out of the cavern, at the critical moment, Shifeng activated the aura of Time's forbidden domain. Please work. Seeing that the space-time teleportation magic array was about to activate, Shifeng could not help but pray for his forbidden domain to succeed in stopping it. Chapter 1577, Threefold Suppression. When Shifeng activated Forbidden Domain, a layer of black mist enveloped the entire cavern, the mist freezing the flow of all the mana inside the cavern. Meanwhile, due to the stoppage in the flow of mana, the space-time teleportation magic array, which was still in the process of activating, failed. The mana the teleportation array had gathered then began to leak out and scatter into the surroundings, which also caused the spatial tear above the stone altar to close. Good. Shifeng inwardly grew ecstatic when he saw the teleportation array disappearing. The space-time teleportation magic array, which was activated using the stone altar, was frighteningly powerful. Although Forbidden Domain could suppress mana, if a source of mana had an insuppressible amount of power, then Forbidden Domain naturally would be of no avail. Fortunately, the enhanced space-time teleportation magic array had yet to reach a realm where Forbidden Domain was ineffective. Meanwhile, the disappearance of the teleportation array had riled up every lizard man inside the entire cavern. Immediately, they all turned to look in Shifeng's direction. Intruder! You dare interrupt this sacred ritual? Pay for your crime with your life. The lizardman chief bellowed at Shifeng, a wrathful expression on his face as he thumped his tail furiously on the ground. Every lizardman present inside the cavern promptly charged at Shifeng. As for the lizardman chief, he gathered mana in his staff to destroy Shifeng's forbidden domain. Among the 300-plus lizardmen charging at Shifeng were 9 lords and 1 high lord. In the face of such a force, even an ordinary Tier 2 expert would shudder in fear. However, rather than feeling fearful, Shifeng smiled as he switched the aura of time to the aura of fire. He then unfurled a crimson Tier 3 magic scroll in his hands. Meanwhile, contained within this magic scroll was none other than the Tier 3 large-scale destruction spell Flame Prison. Suddenly, fiery pillars shot up from the ground, trapping all the oncoming lizardmen in a prison of flames. Any lizardman that came into contact with the scorching flames received devastating amounts of damage, losing over 1 million HP every second. The spell's activation instantly killed the elite-ranked lizardmen. Meanwhile, before Flame Prison's duration was anywhere close to ending, Feng took out an aqua blue tier 3 magic scroll. Ice torrent. A torrent of water crashed down from the cavern's ceiling and impacted the ground heavily. Any living creature that came into contact with the water turned into an ice sculpture on the spot. The chieftain-ranked lizard men who had received critical damage from the initial wave of attacks from Flame Prison had their remaining HPs thoroughly consumed, their frozen bodies shattering into tiny frost particles. Loot then scattered all over the cavern's submerged floor. After just a brief moment, only the 9 lords and 1 high lord remained of the lizard man army. How tough. Seeing that the lord-ranked lizard men were already at critical HP, Feng followed up with Flame Domain. Although Flame Domain was not as powerful as a tier 3 large-scale destruction spell, it was more than enough to deal with the lord-ranked lizard men. After the 3 large-scale destruction spells descended, only the high lord-ranked lizard man captain remained of the 300-plus lizard men that charged at Feng. At this moment though, the high lord had less than half of his HP left. Even so, Feng had no intentions of showing mercy, immediately advancing towards the lizard man captain. If it were during normal times, Feng would pay no attention whatsoever to a high lord-ranked monster. However, he currently had to deal with the grand lord-ranked lizard man chief. If he left the lizard man captain alone now, he might very well come to regret it later on. Currently, the lizard man chief was much more powerful than the grand lord-ranked purgatory puppets Feng had fought during the entrance test. The realm lord also possessed much greater HP. Moreover, Feng was alone right now and the system disallowed the use of summoning scrolls. Hence, it would be extremely difficult for him to kill the lizard man chief, and he definitely could not afford even the slightest bit of carelessness. However, just when Feng arrived before the lizard man captain and was about to use Flame Burst to finish off the High Lord, numerous flame spears suddenly shot at him. Upon seeing this, Feng retreated in surprise. Boom. When the flame spears impacted the ground, large craters immediately formed. What power! So this is a tier 3 spell cast by a realm lord? Feng was inwardly astonished as he looked at the flaming craters. It was self-evident that the Lizard Man Chief had removed the effects of Forbidden Domain. Although the Lizard Man Chief had cast only a Tier 3 spell, its power was already at the Tier 4 standard. If Feng tried blocking such a spell, he might very well lose his life in an instant. Meanwhile, as soon as Feng dodged the flame spears, flames started raining down from midair. At the same time, chains made of flames emerged from the ground and shot at him, giving him no chance to catch a breather. Whether it was the rain of flames or the flaming chains, both were spells capable of killing Feng upon contact right now. Damn it. Gritting his teeth, Feng activated Heavenly Dragon's power. He then executed the Tier 2 instant strike at the Lizard Man Captain. In the blink of an eye, Feng's body disappeared from the trajectories of the Lizard Man Chief's attacks and appeared before the heavily injured Lizard Man Captain. Phantom Kill. 9 Dragon Slash. Feng held nothing back as he launched one powerful attack after another at the Lizard Man Captain, who only had around 4 million HP remaining. Due to Heavenly Dragon's power's effect, Feng's strength attribute increased by 150%. His strength was now superior to even a Grand Lord's of the same level. There was also Instant Strike's effects, which increased his attack speed by 500% and damage dealt by 400%. In the next moment, damages exceeding -100,000 appeared above the Lizard Man Captain's head one after another. Sometimes, a critical hit dealing over -300,000 damage would also occur. As Feng and his doppelganger hacked and slashed at the Lizard Man Captain, they also activated Defensive Blade to block the spell attacks coming from the Lizard Man Chief. The fight with the Lizard Man Captain lasted only a matter of seconds. During this period, the High Lord had very little chance to counterattack. By the time the Lizard Man Captain was dead, Feng and his doppelganger had mostly exhausted the block counts of their defensive blade. Although only the Lizard Man Chief remained now, Feng did not dare to be careless. As a precaution, he stabbed the abyssal blade into the ground and activated Abyssal Curse. Suddenly, pitch-black shackles emerged from the ground beneath the Lizard Man Chief's feet, binding the Realm Lord completely. The Realm Lord's basic attributes then began decreasing rapidly. However, the Lizard Man Chief was not an easy opponent to defeat. With a shout, he shattered the restraints on his body and stopped his basic attributes from decreasing any further. In the end, the Realm Lord still retained 80% of his basic attributes, remaining a nightmarish existence to current players. However, Shifeng had long since expected such an outcome. He then activated Disintegration Field, causing the Lizardman Chief's basic attributes to plummet once more. Eventually, the Lizardman Chief's basic attributes fell to only 60% of their original values. However, Shifeng was still not satisfied with this result. He took out the Ring of Gospel and spent 5,000 magic crystals, activating world projection. Threefold Suppression. If players in the outside world were to see this scene, their eyes would most likely fall out of their sockets. Shifeng had actually suppressed a Realm Lord grade Grand Lord to the point where the boss possessed only 45% of his original basic attributes. Now, the Lizardman Chief was no different from a Great Lord of the same level. However, the Lizardman Chief was thoroughly enraged under Shifeng's threefold suppression. Waving his staff, he cast the most powerful spell in his arsenal, Hell Pythons. Suddenly, the Lizardman Chief's staff transformed into a bundle of flames, which then expanded and became 9 massive, flaming pythons that were fully under the Lizardman Chief's control. He still had such a trump card to play? Shifeng's complexion darkened when he saw the flaming pythons striking at him. Although he had yet to clash with these flaming pythons, he could already tell that they were not something a Tier 2 player like himself could hope to stop. Just when the 9 flaming pythons were about to come into contact with Shifeng, the latter suddenly split into 10 identical copies of himself. This move was none other than Divine Steps. Even if he left the 9 pythons alone, the latter would be able to attack only 9 targets at most at any time. With the flaming pythons distracted, Shifeng immediately made his way towards the Lizardman Chief. Thundering Flash. Flame Burst. Shadow Blade. Both Shifeng's main body and doppelganger attacked the Lizardman Chief in a frenzy. Although the Lizardman Chief was a Realm Lord, his basic attributes were now suppressed to the point where they only rivaled a Great Lords of the same level. Moreover, the Lizardman Chief did not excel in melee battles. As a result, the Lizardman Chief became no different from a punching bag to Shifeng, whose basic attributes were currently superior to a Grand Lords of the same level. 99%, 95%, 90%. When Divine Steps ended, Shifeng took out a Tier 3 defensive scroll, Sacred Shield of Water, and used it. The defensive spell was capable of blocking Tier 4 attacks even for a short moment, let alone the Tier 3 attacks of the flaming pythons. By the time Hell Python's 20-second duration was over, the Sacred Shield of Water still had over a quarter of its energy remaining. Without the annoyance of the Hell Pythons, Shifeng had a much easier time dealing with the Lizardman Chief and was able to whittle down the Realm Lord's HP. When the duration of Heavenly Dragon's power ended, Shifeng promptly followed it up by activating Power of Darkness, maintaining his strength at the level of a Grand Lord. Meanwhile, every one of his normal attacks dealt over -30,000 damage to the Lizardman Chief and -80,000 for a critical hit. His skill attacks dealt over -100,000 damage each and -300,000 for a critical hit. However, Shifeng would occasionally be forced to block one of the Lizardman Chief's spell attacks with his weapons, losing 10,000 to 20,000 HP in the process. Fortunately, Shifeng had Life Domain and Void Shield to help him recover and block a portion of those attacks. Hence, he had no problems keeping his HP above a safe margin. The only real challenge he faced was that the high-intensity combat was depleting both his stamina and concentration at a severe rate. As the minutes passed by, the Lizardman Chief's HP steadily decreased. 50%, 30%, 10%. Despicable intruder. I will not let you win. The Lizardman Chief suddenly exploded in violent fury and tossed aside his staff. He then started gathering a stupendous amount of mana inside his body. Following which, not only did his body turn pitch black, but it also doubled in size. Mana Madness. At this moment, when Shifeng looked at the Lizardman Chief, he could feel the threat of death from the Realm Lord. Actually, even if his mind did not warn him about the Lizardman Chief, his eyes could see very clearly just how dangerous the Realm Lord was right now. Despite the Lizardman Chief just standing still right now, the ground beneath the Realm Lord buckled and shattered from the intense aura his body radiated. The air surrounding the Lizardman Chief had also become extremely heavy as well as scorching hot. Roar! The Lizardman Chief bellowed and dashed forward, appearing in front of Shifeng in the blink of an eye. The Realm Lord then raised his massive arms and smashed down at Shifeng. Come! Shifeng had no intention of dodging the Realm Lord's attack. Instead, he activated the Tier 2 Blade Liberation, increasing his basic attributes once more. Shadow Blade. Suddenly, several streaks of shadow merged with the slash Shifeng executed using Killing Ray, the combined attack landing squarely on the Lizard Man Chief's fists. Boom. Shifeng was forced to retreat by only half a step from the resulting impact. In contrast, the Lizard Man Chief's arms got flung away, leaving his scaly chest wide open to attack. Moreover, the counter had also forced the Realm Lord to retreat by 2 steps. A chance. Shifeng used this opportunity to activate Divine Providence and stab the Abyssal Blade at the Lizard Man Chief. Flame burst. After launching a series of devastating attacks, Shifeng eventually reaped the final 10% HP the Lizard Man Chief had remaining. Meanwhile, like a bursting balloon, the Realm Lord's body instantly turned into ashes and disappeared. Chapter 1578, Basic Strength Battle Array. He's finally dead. Shifeng breathed out a sigh of relief when he saw the Lizard Man Chief disappearing. After going berserk, the Lizard Man Chief was simply too powerful. Not only was the Realm Lord's strength overwhelming, but his attacks also carried the mana erosion effect. Every time Shifeng clashed with the Realm Lord, although he appeared to have the advantage in reality, his HP also decreased by a significant amount. At this moment, Shifeng's HP had already fallen below 25%. Had the Lizard Man Chief been able to endure a few more attacks, the one to die in that battle would have been Shifeng instead. Meanwhile, after the Lizard Man Chief died, over a dozen items had dropped to the ground, including 3 pieces of level 55 fine gold equipment, 4 pieces of level 55 secret silver equipment, 8 rare materials, and 2 mana barrier crystal fragments. For a level 60 Grand Lord, this loot was quite satisfactory. Not to mention, aside from all these items, the Realm Lord had also dropped 3 design fragments. When Shifeng saw these design fragments, his eyes immediately glowed. After all, these design fragments were meant for none other than the Conqueror's armor design. With this, I'll be able to start producing level 50 fine gold equipment that has a basic battle array added to it. Shifeng smiled as he looked at the 3 design fragments. He then combined the 9 design fragments, forming a complete forging design. Conqueror's Armor Forging Design, Advanced Design, Fine Gold Rank. When learned, you will be able to produce the level 50 magic rune armor. Every piece of armor produced will have a magic array carved on it. 5 pieces of armor can be used to form a basic strength battle array. Conqueror's Armor, Chest Piece, Plate Armor, Fine Gold Rank. Level 50. Equipment Requirement, Strength 700 and Agility 700. Defense plus 2150. Strength plus 64, Endurance plus 72, Agility plus 60. Additional passive skill dash. Life Sacrifice. The lower the wearer's HP, the greater the power they will receive. Increases to a maximum of 10% strength and 20% attack speed. Additional active skill dash. Basic Strength Battle Array, requires 5 or more players wearing the Conqueror's armor to activate. Upon activation, increases wearer's strength by 25%, agility by 15%, endurance by 15%, and physique by 10%. Grants basic perception sharing buff. Stamina and concentration consumption rates are also increased by 400%. Maintaining the battle array costs 1 magic crystal every 5 minutes. The effects of this basic strength battle array sure are powerful. Shifeng could not help his astonishment after reading through the Conqueror's Armor's introduction. He had seen many basic battle arrays before. Meanwhile, a basic battle array would be considered excellent if it increased the attribute it specialized in by 20%. Normally though, most basic battle arrays only increased their specialized attributes by 15%. The Conqueror's Armor's basic strength battle array, however, actually increased strength by 25% and 2 other basic attributes by 15%. There was also the 10% improvement to physique. The effects of the basic strength battle array could already rival the transformation effects of demon players. In fact, the basic strength battle array provided even greater improvements to a player's combat power than a demon player's demon state did. After all, the battle array's perception sharing buff allowed players to eliminate their defensive blind spots. This, in turn, would improve a player's combat standards significantly. Moreover, coordination between players wearing the Conqueror's armor would also become much better, and they would be able to execute much more frightening attacks. If a party of 5 elite players was equipped with the Conqueror's armor, they might be able to defeat even a party of 5 ordinary experts. This was the reason the various large guilds had been extremely desperate to obtain equipment with battle arrays in the past. Moreover, the basic strength battle array was only a basic battle array. If the Conqueror's armor had an intermediate or advanced battle array instead, it could provide even more frightening improvements to a player's combat power. In the past, it was also because of some special battle arrays that many insignificant small guilds had managed to survive despite not subordinating themselves to a large guild. Currently, the value of the Conqueror's armor design was worth even more than fragmented legendary items. After going through the Lizardman Chief's loot, Shifeng approached the stone altar and carefully picked up the gold tablet placed on top of it. Shifeng was very curious to find out just what kind of combat technique the tablet recorded. To all players, secret technique tablets were precious treasures that they could use to learn combat techniques from. Moreover, the higher the rank of a secret technique tablet, the more powerful the combat technique one could learn from it. In fact, in order to obtain a gold tablet, an NPC had gone as far as to commit robbery in the middle of Blackwing City. After suppressing the excitement in his heart, Shifeng clicked to inspect the gold tablet. Secret body technique. The pattern engraved on this tablet is too vague and incomplete, and no information can be deciphered. However, some kind of divine power hides within this pattern. If one gathers all of the stone tablets, this vague and incomplete pattern can be restored. Current tablet count, 1/3. A secret body technique? Shifeng's eyes glowed as he looked at the gold tablet. It was common knowledge that among the various combat techniques available in God's domain, combat techniques focused on the physical body were the most valuable. Moreover, just like void steps, such techniques were suitable for both physically and magically oriented classes. Even if one failed to grasp the combat technique completely, they would still be able to improve their control over their own bodies. After he finished inspecting the gold tablet, before he could even store it away, a golden light suddenly shone down on him. A pleasant feeling filled Shifeng's body as he was enveloped in this golden light. He also fully recovered all the stamina and concentration he had exhausted previously. System, congratulations. You have exceeded your own limits and achieved an exploit acknowledged by the gods. System, congratulations. You are the first player to have achieved an exploit on the Divine Staircase. Rewarding 15,000 shrine points. So, this is an exploit? Shifeng could not help but feel joyous when he saw the proof of having achieved an exploit appearing in his status window. Also, 15,000 shrine points? The system sure is generous. Unlike shrine points, one's accumulated exploits would not reset upon leaving the World Summit. They would remain until players spent them or deleted them deliberately. Meanwhile, the more valuable items available at the Divine Staircase, such as bloodlines and fragmented legendary items, all required exploits to exchange for. Otherwise, even if one had the necessary shrine points, they would only be able to stare at their desired items, helpless to do anything. Moreover, due to the system reward this time, Shifeng's accumulated shrine points had finally broken past the 100,000 point threshold. He was now qualified to exchange for the cheapest bloodline. After thinking up to this point, Shifeng could not help but quickly leave the 30th Divine Shrine. When he appeared back on the Divine Staircase, a series of system notifications entered his ears. System, congratulations. You have passed the Divine Shrine. Rewarding 1,500 shrine points. System, congratulations. You have passed the Divine Shrine within the time limit. Rewarding 1,500 shrine points. System, congratulations. You have killed the Guardian boss within the time limit. Rewarding 4,000 shrine points. After including these rewards, Shifeng's total shrine points reached 109,360. However, he still had no intention of ending his challenge. After getting sufficient rest, he immediately proceeded to the next Divine Shrine. Although he currently no longer had enough magic crystals to use world projection for the subsequent Guardian bosses, even if he could not beat the Guardian bosses, he was more than capable of maneuvering past them. In any case, he was not required to defeat the Guardian bosses in order to clear the Divine Shrines and ascend the Divine Staircase. Hence, while avoiding battle with the Guardian bosses, Shifeng cleared one Divine Shrine after another. Meanwhile, as he was rapidly accumulating more shrine points, some players out on the World Summit had also started to notice something odd. Previously, the highest record on the ranking list displayed before the various Divine Shrines was only at the 33rd Divine Shrine. Now, however, someone had already reached the 35th Divine Shrine. Moreover, this person showed no signs of slowing down as they sped through the 35th Divine Shrine and entered the 36th. Who is this person? Skyhawk, who had just exited the 33rd Divine Shrine, revealed a surprised expression as he looked at the Divine Shrine ranking list. As one reached further Divine Shrines, not only would they face much more difficult bosses, but the traps set up inside the Divine Shrines also became increasingly powerful. In fact, Skyhawk had spent 2 of his 7 attempts on clearing the 33rd Divine Shrine. Furthermore, he had already planned on giving up trying to pass the 34th Divine Shrine altogether. As for the 35th Divine Shrine, he did not even dare think about clearing it. After all, the Divine Staircase's difficulty increased substantially every 5 levels. Despite that, there was actually someone who had successfully done so already and was challenging the 36th. Chapter 1579, Redeeming a Bloodline. After Shi Feng entered the 36th Divine Shrine, the monsters he came across were mostly chieftains. Meanwhile, the monster patrol squads he encountered were mainly led by level 60 lords, with a few led by high lords. Even an expert player would not dare to pick a fight if they came across such monster patrol squads. Their only option would be to run away. In addition, the traps found inside the Divine Shrine had increased in both quantity and quality. Now, every trap was more than capable of killing a player instantly. If players lacked the strength to cope with the traps and patrol squads simultaneously, it was basically game over for them. To Shi Feng, however, these monster patrol squads were no problem whatsoever. Only, having to deal with both the traps and monsters at the same time consumed a lot of his time and stamina. Fortunately, he had life essences to help replenish his stamina. Hence, he still managed to arrive at the teleportation array of the 36th Divine Shrine relatively easily. From the 35th Divine Shrine onwards, the Guardian bosses had become Grand Lord-ranked archaic species. Even if Shi Feng had enough magic crystals to execute threefold suppression, he was not confident of defeating such a foe. A casual hit from a Grand Lord-ranked archaic species could heavily injure Shi Feng even if he succeeded in blocking the attack. If he failed, needless to say, he would be killed instantly. As a result, Shi Feng had to resort to Heavenly Dragon's power and life domain to keep himself alive. He then used the doppelganger summoned through Phantom Kill to activate the teleportation array. After the teleportation array was ready, he swapped positions with his doppelganger and promptly left the 36th Divine Shrine. Although Shi Feng failed to kill the Guardian boss, passing the 36th Divine Shrine still granted him a total of 4,000 shrine points. Through this method, he smoothly ascended the Divine Staircase all the way up to the 40th Divine Shrine, causing a huge commotion among the players in the World Summit. After all, the second-ranked player only managed to clear the 33rd Divine Shrine. Meanwhile, Shi Feng directly chose to give up on the challenge after passing the 40th Divine Shrine. The reason for this decision was the Guardian bosses no longer being Grand Lord-ranked archaic species, but mythic monsters instead from the 40th Divine Shrine onwards. Whether it was in terms of strength, speed, or combat standards, a mythic monster surpassed a Grand Lord-ranked archaic species by a wide margin. Against a mythic monster, skills such as Abyssal Curse and Disintegration Field had minimal effect. Even after Shi Feng had used Heavenly Dragon's power, the Guardian boss of the 40th Divine Shrine still managed to overwhelm him. Had Shi Feng made even the slightest mistake during the fight, he would have definitely been killed instantly. In the end, he was left with no choice but to resort to twofold berserk. However, even after he did so, against an unsuppressed mythic monster, it had taken him everything he had just to keep his life. Fortunately, he was able to hold out long enough for his doppelganger to activate the teleportation array, and he succeeded in leaving the 40th Divine Shrine. However, after activating twofold berserk, he had also entered a weakened state which had a very long duration. As this method of clearing the Divine Shrines was simply too time-consuming, Shi Feng decided that it was better to give up and use his remaining time to explore the other shrines on the World Summit. After Shi Feng chose to leave the Divine Staircase, he arrived back at the Divine Hall located at the bottom of the World Summit. There are so many people. Upon arriving at the Divine Hall, he discovered that most of the demon players he encountered at the World Summit's main entrance were currently present in the Divine Hall. Buying demon potions 150 gold per bottle. Willing to use level 45 top-tier weapons and equipment to exchange as well. Purchasing set pieces for level 50 dark gold or fine gold set equipment. Price is negotiable. Among the players present inside the Divine Hall, very few were here to exchange for items using their shrine points. Instead, the majority of the players were purchasing items exchanged using shrine points. Rather than an exchange center, the Divine Hall looked more like a marketplace right now. At this moment, a cloaked player approached Shifeng and asked, "Fellow friend, you just came out from the Divine Staircase, right? If you still have points remaining after you're done exchanging for the items you want, I'm willing to purchase those points at a high price. I'll buy 20 points for 1 gold. I'll buy 10 points for 1 gold if you have over 1,000 points, 10 points for 2 gold if you have over 3,000 points, and 10 points for 3 gold if you have over 5,000 points. How about it?" Hearing the cloaked player's words, Shifeng was inwardly astonished. The purchase price was simply too frightening. If players had over 5,000 points on hand, that meant passing the first divine shrine alone could already earn them 6 gold coins. If they defeated the guardian boss as well, they could make a total of 21 gold from clearing the first divine shrine. "Sorry, but I don't have that many points to spare," Shifeng replied, shaking his head. He then headed straight for the exchange counter, showing no intention of trading away his points for coins. After all, he did not have a lot of shrine points on hand. Currently, he had accumulated a total of only 146,360 points. Given Shifeng's lack of interest, the cloaked player had no choice but to search for willing sellers. When Shifeng arrived before the exchange counter, a female demon NPC smiled at him and asked, "Hello, sir, may I know what item you wish to exchange for?" "Bloodlines?" Shifeng replied. "Bloodlines?" The demon NPC revealed a shocked expression when she heard Shifeng's answer. Very quickly, however, she nodded and said, "All right. Here is a list of bloodlines available for exchange." Although Shifeng and the female demon NPC did not speak loudly, everyone present in the Divine Hall was an expert. They also possessed considerably good physiques. Moreover, they were very familiar with the high-ranking items available for exchange at the Divine Hall. Hence, upon hearing the word bloodline, they turned to look at Shifeng, who stood before the exchange counter, their ears immediately perking up. What? That person is actually trying to exchange for a bloodline? Even the cheapest bloodline requires 100,000 points. Previously, I heard that the monsters that managed to pass the 31st Divine Shrine only obtained 32,540 points. They are far from reaching 100,000 points. That guy should just be taking a look at the available bloodlines. No, that might not be the case. I checked the ranking list just now and saw that someone has already cleared the 40th Divine Shrine. He might be that person. Still, even if he cleared the 40th Divine Shrine, it shouldn't be possible for him to accumulate so many points. At this moment, everyone looked at Shifeng with eyes filled with curiosity. After all, to them, 100,000 shrine points was an astronomical amount. It seems nobody else has discovered it yet. From the hushed discussions Shifeng overheard, he couldn't help but pity these expert demon players. In order to save time, these players had chosen the fastest method to clear the divine shrines and missed out on the opportunity to obtain the points for killing the guardian bosses. However, he also wasn't so kind-hearted as to announce this fact. Following which, he focused his gaze on the list of bloodlines the NPC provided him. There was a total of 33 different bloodlines available for exchange. Among them, 23 were basic bloodlines, 8 were advanced bloodlines and 2 were peak bloodlines. In his 2 lives playing God's Domain, this was the first time Shifeng saw so many bloodlines gathered in one place. Meanwhile, any single one of these bloodlines could cause any expert in the past to go crazy over it. Even Apex experts would have been willing to pay any price to acquire one of these bloodlines. Chapter 1580, Hidden Benefit. Sure enough, they are all amazing. It's no wonder so many experts were so crazy about bloodlines back then. Shifeng felt slightly emotional when he saw the list of bloodlines. In the past, even superpowers had an extremely tough time getting their hands on bloodlines. Information on bloodlines was also heavily restricted. Even though Shifeng had been the guild leader of a second-rate guild, he had not possessed any detailed information on bloodlines. All he knew was that bloodlines improved a player's life rating and that they were of great help when players got promoted to higher tiers. Meanwhile, although the list of bloodlines the demon NPC gave him did not reveal a lot of information, what he could see was already more than enough to thrill him. Even the most ordinary bloodline would allow players to undergo a qualitative transformation. Take the Frost Bloodline for example. It increased the owner's compatibility with Ice-type skills and spells, improving their skill and spell completion rates and base power. In addition, players with Bloodlines would gain some extra basic attribute points every time they leveled up. In the case of the Frost Bloodline, its primary focus was intelligence, while strength, agility, endurance, and vitality were secondary. Moreover, the bonus basic attributes gained through leveling up would further increase with each tier promotion. Eventually, as players rose in levels, the gap in basic attributes between players with Bloodlines and players without Bloodlines would also grow increasingly wider, to the point where the disparity could instill despair. However, looking at the cost of the various Bloodlines listed, Shifeng could not help but frown. Of the two peak Bloodlines available, one needed 340,000 SPs, while the other needed 360,000 SPs. In addition, both of them required 3 exploits each. These peak Bloodlines were even more expensive than the top-tier fragmented legendary items. As for the 8 advanced Bloodlines, they too were far beyond Shifeng's reach, as even the cheapest among them cost 200,000 SPs and 2 exploits, while the most expensive one cost 260,000 SPs and 2 exploits. Even if he managed to kill the mythic ranked guardian boss in the 40th Divine Shrine, accumulating 200,000 SPs was unlikely. It seems I can exchange for only a basic Bloodline. Shifeng could not help but sigh. Revealing a bitter smile, he set his eyes on the 23 basic Bloodlines. Even the cheap basic Bloodline, which was named Boulder Bloodline, cost 100,000 SPs and 1 exploit. The Boulder Bloodline improved a player's defense, and the main basic attribute it increased was endurance. It was a Bloodline more suited for MTs rather than swordsmen. In the end, Shifeng narrowed his choices to 3 Bloodlines. Hurricane Bloodline. Increases compatibility with wind-type skills and spells. Mainly improves agility, followed by endurance, strength, vitality, and intelligence. Requires 115,000 shrine points and 1 exploit to exchange. Scorching Flame Bloodline. Increases compatibility with fire-type skills and spells. Mainly improves endurance, followed by strength, agility, vitality, and intelligence. Requires 122,000 shrine points and 1 exploit to exchange. Earth Dragon Bloodline. Increases magic resistance. Mainly improves strength, followed by endurance, agility, vitality, and intelligence. Requires 125,000 shrine points and 1 exploit to exchange. These 3 Bloodlines were more suitable for a melee physical class like the Swordsman class. Whether they were wind-type or fire-type skills, the Swordsman class had a little of both. Hence, the Hurricane and Scorching Flame Bloodlines would provide significant improvements to a swordsman's DPS. As for the Earth Dragon Bloodline, it was suitable for practically every class in the game. As players reached higher levels, the maps available for them to grind in would have increasingly poor environments. In the past, many players would even prepare multiple sets of equipment to cope with different environments. Hence, magic resistance was very helpful to players. All 3 Bloodlines were considerably good. At the moment, Shifeng did not know which Bloodline to choose. "Sir, should I recommend you a few Bloodlines that are suited to yourself?" the female demon NPC asked, smiling as she looked at Shifeng's hesitant expression. "May I know what your recommendations are?" Shifeng could not help but ask curiously. Recommendations from NPCs were generally very accurate. However, it was not easy for players to get one from them. Usually, a player had to be lucky or have sufficiently high favorability with an NPC for such a situation to occur. As you are the heavens blessed that has progressed the furthest up the divine staircase, you get to enjoy a 10% discount on all exchanges. Hence, I recommend either the Thunderblade Advanced Bloodline or the Dark Iron Basic Bloodline, the female demon replied as she called out 2 displays showing the details of the bloodlines she mentioned. "You're saying the number 1 ranking player in the divine staircase gets a 10% discount?" Shifeng was slightly surprised to hear this. He never thought that the divine staircase's ranking list also provided such a hidden benefit. The Thunderblade bloodline the female demon mentioned was an advanced bloodline. It improved not only a player's compatibility with lightning-type skills and spells but also their attack speed. As for basic attributes, the advanced bloodline mainly improved strength and agility, followed by intelligence, endurance, and vitality. However, since it was a powerful bloodline, its cost was also frighteningly high. It needed a whopping 230,000 shrine points and 2 exploits. Even with the 10% discount, he couldn't afford this bloodline. As for the Dark Iron Bloodline, it increased a player's compatibility with melee skills. As for basic attributes, the Bloodline mainly increased strength, followed by agility, endurance, vitality, and intelligence. The Bloodline's price was likewise very high, requiring 150,000 SPs and 1 exploit. Currently, he had 146,360 SPs. If he included the 10% discount, he would have more than enough to exchange for the Dark Iron Bloodline. "I'll exchange for this Dark Iron Bloodline," Shifeng said, inwardly ecstatic as he looked at the Dark Iron Bloodline. Among the many basic bloodlines available, the Dark Iron Bloodline was the most suited to melee classes. Since he could afford it, he naturally wouldn't go choosing other basic bloodlines. "Alright. You have to pay a total of 135,000 shrine points and 1 exploit," the female demon said, nodding. Immediately, a payment window appeared before Shifeng. Without hesitation, he chose to complete the transaction. A moment later, the female demon retrieved a pitch-black crystal bottle from a magic array beside her. She then carefully handed the bottle over to Shifeng. "So this is a bloodline?" As Shifeng looked at the pitch-black liquid inside the magic crystal bottle, he could sense vitality radiating from the liquid. Moreover, the liquid also contained terrifying power. "This is the Dark Iron Bloodline you've purchased. Please store it away properly. May I know if you have anything else you wish to exchange for?" "I wish to exchange for the cheapest god crystal available." When Shifeng took a look at the shrine points he had remaining, he saw he still had 11,360 points left. Meanwhile, the cheapest god crystal up for exchange cost 12,000 SPs before discount, which was significantly less expensive than an epic item. Not to mention, compared to an epic item, a god crystal was much more useful to him. Following which, the female demon inserted her hand into the magic array beside her again and retrieved a god crystal. Every god crystal carried the remnant divine might of a god. Hence, the mere appearance of a god crystal caused the players inside the divine hall to feel an enormous pressure bearing down on them. What is this pressure? It's so strong. What kind of item can give off such a powerful pressure? Who is that person? Just now he seemed to have exchanged for a bloodline already. Now he's even exchanging for such an item. Just how many points does he have? The crowd inside the divine hall stared at Shifeng in shock. The players that previously doubted him now looked at him with eyes brimming with envy and admiration. A bloodline. That was something that could allow even an ordinary player to become an expert. If demon experts like themselves could obtain a bloodline, they would definitely become one of the apex existences in God's domain in the future. Hence, how could they not envy Shifeng? Meanwhile, after Shifeng obtained the Dark Iron Bloodline and God Crystal, he no longer had any reason to remain in the Divine Hall. He immediately turned around and headed towards the exit. However, before Shifeng could leave the Divine Hall, a man suddenly stood in his way. Smiling, the man said, "Fellow friend, your performance at the Divine Staircase is amazing. May I know if you can hand over that bloodline you have to the Flower of Seven Sins? Rest assured, the Flower of Seven Sins definitely will not mistreat you and will reward you amply." With a look, Shifeng identified the man before him as none other than Skyhawk of the Flower of Seven Sins. Chapter 1581, Disintegration Armor Recovers. Chapter 1581, Disintegration Armor Recovers. Overhearing Skyhawk's request, the players inside the Divine Hall could not help but turn to look at him with shocked expressions. What? That guy is actually someone from the Flower of Seven Sins? Sure enough, even a superpower like the Flower of Seven Sins is highly interested in bloodlines. I wonder if that person will agree to trade his bloodline away. Why wouldn't he agree? That's the Flower of Seven Sins we're talking about. It's the strongest assassination organization in the virtual gaming world. Who would dare defy them? The surrounding onlookers started a quiet discussion among themselves as they looked at Skyhawk. The Flower of Seven Sins was known by practically everyone in the virtual gaming world. However, the members of the Flower of Seven Sins always took action covertly, so most players had only ever heard about the organization and knew that it specialized in commissions for assassination. As long as one could afford the price, the Flower of Seven Sins would dare to take action even against super guilds. Moreover, every member of the Flower of Seven Sins was an expert among experts. Even super guilds felt fearful of some of the organization's experts. Meanwhile, regarding the matter of Shifeng acquiring a bloodline, although the onlookers felt very envious of him, They also knew that any player capable of exchanging for a bloodline was definitely no ordinary expert. Hence, there was very little chance they could steal the bloodline from Shifeng. However, it would be a different story if the Flower of Seven Sins was the one asking for it. The Flower of Seven Sins dared to take action against even the old monsters of super guilds. Although Shifeng was someone capable of acquiring a bloodline, the Flower of Seven Sins would still consider him an insignificant existence. Just as everyone was wondering what kind of decision Shifeng would make, Shifeng rolled his eyes at the arrogant Skyhawk. "I'm not interested in this transaction. You'd best look for someone else," Shifeng said before continuing towards the main entrance of the Divine Hall. Bloodlines were limited items in God's domain. Although they were available for exchange at the Divine Staircase, every bloodline was unique. Once one was taken, its listing would no longer appear at the Divine Staircase. In addition, players wouldn't be allowed to exchange for items of similar rank and type in the future, which implied that players could exchange for only one basic bloodline at the Divine Staircase in their lifetime. If Shifeng wished to exchange for another bloodline in the future, his options would be only advanced bloodlines and peak bloodlines. The same rule applied for epic and fragmented legendary items as well. Players were limited to only one such item. Hence, Shifeng naturally wouldn't be so foolish as to trade away his bloodline. Moreover, even if he could exchange for an unlimited number of bloodlines, he still wouldn't trade the Dark Iron bloodline away. Bloodlines were incomparably precious. Aside from the Divine Staircase, Shifeng had no idea where he could obtain a bloodline with absolute certainty. Hence, if he managed to get his hands on additional bloodlines, he would naturally give it to the other members of his guild. Only a fool would try to sell their bloodlines away. Upon Shifeng's departure, Skyhawk's complexion darkened immediately. That guy's dead. He actually dared offend someone from the Flower of Seven Sins. As expected of an expert. If it were me, I definitely would have chosen to trade away the bloodline. Everyone could not help but send Shifeng looks of pity and worship as they watched the swordsman leave the Divine Hall. When it came to tracking and investigative capabilities, the Flower of Seven Sins could rival even the Secret Pavilion. If the organization wanted someone dead, there was almost no escaping the organization's grasp. Hence, if given a choice, independent experts would rather provoke a super guild than the Flower of Seven Sins. "Commander, that person sure is arrogant. He actually dares disrespect the Flower of Seven Sins." The Guardian Knight belonging to Skyhawk's party said as he approached Skyhawk, shock and anger on his face as he looked at Shifeng's departing figure. "Since he refuses to trade it to us, we'll just take it away from him by force." Skyhawk sneered as he looked at Shifeng. "Did you use the tracking scroll?" "I did. For the next 12 hours, no matter where he runs to, we'll be able to find him." The Guardian Knight smiled and nodded. Taking a look at his system map, he continued, "He seems to be heading for the World Summit." In God's domain, while it was indeed true that only rangers and assassins possessed tracking abilities, other players could rely on special magic scrolls to track players. Meanwhile, as these special magic scrolls did not deal any damage, even when used on a player, the said player would not notice the tracking marker and neither could they remove it. Unless the targeted player logged out of the game, they could be located regardless of where they went. The only flaw of these special magic scrolls was that they could not be used repeatedly on the same target. Once a player was marked, no other tracking marker could be placed on them within the next 48 hours. What a confident person. Notify Ink Hunter and have him get ready. "We'll take action on the World Summit," Skyhawk ordered. In the World Summit, only the foot of the mountain was a safe zone. Once players ascended the mountain, the prohibition on attacking other players no longer applied. There, players could fight each other however much they wanted. Only once a player was killed on the World Summit, although they would not lose a level, they would drop an item and be sent directly out of the World Summit regardless of how much time they had remaining. Since bloodlines were categorized as limited items, after players exchanged for a bloodline, they could not use it immediately. They needed to wait 3 hours for the restriction to end. Meanwhile, if players were killed during this restriction period, they would drop the bloodline with a 100% certainty. Understood. The Guardian Knight licked his lips in anticipation as he contacted their cleric companion. Meanwhile, after Shifeng ascended the World Summit, he did not make a beeline for the area where the epic shrines were located. Instead, he found a secluded spot and retrieved the Disintegration armor and God Crystal from his bag. Hopefully it doesn't require too many. Feng took a deep breath as he chose the fusion option in the system interface. In the Divine Staircase's exchange menu, God crystals were considered only unique items and not limited items. However, players had a cap of 1 God crystal per visit to the World Summit. If Feng wished to exchange for another God crystal, he could do so only on his next visit. After he chose to fuse the Disintegration armor and God crystal, the magic circuits carved on the Disintegration armor released a dazzling silver glow. At the same time, the Disintegration power the armor radiated intensified. A short moment later, a stream of evil pitch-black energy flowed out of the Disintegration armor. This pitch-black energy felt as if it could corrode all items in existence. In fact, it even began corroding the ground, air, and even space around the Disintegration armor. What a strong power. Feng involuntarily retreated 3 steps in a hurry as he looked at this pitch-black energy, deeply afraid of getting tainted by this corrosive energy. However, shortly after this pitch-black energy started corrupting its surroundings, the space around it began trembling. The boundless energy permeating the entire World Summit actually started dispelling this pitch-black energy. In the blink of an eye, it obliterated the pitch-black energy. The World Summit truly is a place created by gods. Feng could not help his surprise as he looked at the formerly decayed grass and air that had reverted to their original states. The corrosive energy was capable of suppressing even the Disintegration armor's mighty Disintegration power. Yet, when this pitch-black energy came into contact with the energy in World Summit, it got wiped out almost instantly. Meanwhile, after this pitch-black energy was removed, a small change occurred to the Disintegration armor. The formerly dull and tattered armor was actually glowing right now. Although it still had some physical damage and the magic circuits engraved on it remained dim and powerless, the Disintegration power it exuded had become much more resplendent than before. Even Feng, the owner of the Disintegration armor, felt intense pressure coming from it. He immediately walked up to the Disintegration armor and checked its statistics again. What amazing attributes! Feng could not help but grow ecstatic as he looked at the Disintegration armor's new statistics. Chapter 1582, Domain Improves. Chapter 1582, Domain Improves. Feng's desire for the Disintegration armor was intense. After all, it was a set piece of one of the 9 great legendary sets in God's domain. He had only heard rumors about the 9 great legendary sets in the past. He knew that these 9 sets were far stronger than ordinary legendary set equipment. They could be considered the best among the various legendary set equipment in God's domain. Generally, among the various pieces of a set equipment, the chest piece was the most important. As long as he could repair the Disintegration armor, its benefits would be far beyond that of ordinary legendary equipment. Although the Disintegration armor hadn't fully recovered, its statistics were frightening. Disintegration armor, one piece of the legendary set equipment the Orc Empire's founding emperor had crafted. The wearer of this armor will gain even greater strength than that of Titans. They will also fall into an endless cycle of madness. However, the Disintegration armor had been damaged beyond repair during the Great War, and now leaks the Disintegration power within. The Disintegration power will taint any player that carries this item. It has also been tainted by an evil power, making it impossible to recast the armor. At present, 75% of the armor is still tainted by an evil power. Disintegration field disintegrates all skills and spells within a 100-yard radius. Skills and spells at Tier 2 and below will be nullified, while skills and spells above Tier 2 will be weakened by 70%. All entities within range of the Disintegration field will sustain a 40% reduction to basic attributes, physique, and stamina in addition to a 400% increase to their stamina and concentration consumption rates. No cooldown. Despite removing a quarter of the evil power, the Disintegration armor's power had grown significantly. He didn't dare to imagine how powerful the Disintegration field would become once he removed the remaining evil power. Disintegration field's ability to weaken skills and spells above Tier 2 by 70% was outrageous. Such suppression would basically cripple any skill or spell it encountered. The skill or spell would likely deal even less damage than a normal attack, and that's not even including the 40% reduction to basic attributes. Only 3 more to go. Feng could not help his grin as he looked at the remaining evil power in the armor. Although he had spent more time on the Divine Staircase than any other player, he had earned a lot of time in the entrance test. He still had 5,724 minutes he could use to explore the World Summit. If he spent this time wisely, he shouldn't have any issues acquiring 3 more God Crystals. Opening an epic shrine only cost 1,000 minutes, and excluding travel time between shrines, he could activate up to 5 epic shrines. As long as 3 of these epic shrines contained God Crystals, he could remove the remaining evil power that tainted the Disintegration armor. Once he had a plan, Shifeng stopped wasting his time. After storing the Disintegration armor, he dashed towards the epic shrine area. Shifeng ascended the World Summit's mountain far faster than he had during his previous visit, even though he was still suffering a weakened state from activating Twofold Berserk. After climbing the mountain for a little over an hour, he had made it past the bronze area and was already past the mysterious iron area. During his climb, he had spotted many players who tried to make the most of their remaining time as they entered as many low-rank shrines as possible. Unlike the Dark Gold and Epic shrines, which cost 400 minutes and 1,000 minutes to activate, respectively, lower-ranked shrines were relatively cheap to activate. The Bronze and Mysterious Iron shrines, in particular, only cost 50 minutes and 100 minutes to activate. Just as Shifeng was about to reach the secret silver area, 3 figures moved to intercept him. Leading this trio was none other than the Flower of Seven Sins Skyhawk. What a coincidence! We meet again, Skyhawk said, smiling at the cloaked Shifeng. A coincidence? Glancing at Skyhawk and his 2 companions who currently wore sneers, Shifeng said, I'm wearing a black cloak like many of the players in the World Summit. Quite a few of them are swordsmen as well. Aside from using a tracking scroll, I don't think you have any other methods of differentiating me from anyone else. Such a quick and astute observation is only to be expected from the expert that earned enough SPs to purchase a bloodline, Skyhawk praised and clapped. You are correct. To find you, I used one of the only 2 tracking scrolls I had on hand. Are you willing to sell us the bloodline now? Tracking scrolls were extremely rare and precious items in God's domain. They were treasures used to hunt players. If Shifeng had merely obtained an epic weapon or piece of equipment from the Divine Staircase, he would not have bothered to waste a tracking scroll on the swordsman. However, Shifeng carried a bloodline. Skyhawk would even willingly spend 10 tracking scrolls to hunt this swordsman down. What if I refuse? Shifeng asked. Refuse? Skyhawk could not help but laugh at Shifeng's question. You can refuse, but the Flower of Seven Sins always gets what it wants. Or do you think that you can actually escape our pursuit? Skyhawk's statement had been quite loud, and his words quickly caught the attention of nearby players who came and went from the secret silver area. What's going on? Members of the Flower of Seven Sins are actually robbing someone. Is this for real? That person sure is unlucky. The passing players sent Shifeng looks of sympathy. Although they weren't certain that Skyhawk and his companions were actually from the Flower of Seven Sins, they outnumbered their target. Moreover, their weapons and equipment were exceptional. These 3 players definitely weren't ordinary experts. Shifeng would clearly be at a disadvantage if the trio decided to take action. Commander, those people seem to think that Flower of Seven Sins members are robbing someone, a savage-like man who had just descended from the secret silver area, reported to the cold beauty beside him as he looked toward Shifeng. The other members in the World Summit should be in Skyhawk's party. Should we go and take a look? There's no need. It's Skyhawk's party, the woman said as she looked at the man with a broken, massive pitch-black blade across his back. If Skyhawk weren't preoccupied, he would notice that the cloaked savage and the cold beauty were none other than Brute Spear and Hidden Soul. Seriously? What exactly happened? Why are they resorting to theft? Brute Spear could not help but gape at the distant berserker. The Flower of Seven Sins only had 7 commanders. Meanwhile, Skyhawk commanded the Sin of Wrath, an existence that stood among the Flower of Seven Sins' upper echelons. Normally, Skyhawk felt it beneath himself to attack someone for an epic item, yet this man was trying to rob someone. If news of this reached the organization, it would cause chaos. I don't know, but this is quite interesting. Let's head over and find out what's going on. When Hidden Soul saw Skyhawk ready to take action, interest bubbled in her heart. However, this interest was not directed towards Skyhawk, but Skyhawk's target. A player daring enough to offend Skyhawk had to be extraordinary. Immediately, these 2 players approached the battle to get a better grasp of the situation. Meanwhile, Skyhawk's party burst into action. As companions that frequently fought alongside each other, The trio had long since reached an instinctual understanding of the party's battle formation. Immediately, Ridiculous, the tall, robust Guardian Knight, charged towards Shifeng. Meanwhile, Skyhawk took advantage of the Ridiculous' large frame, shielding himself as he stealthily circled to Shifeng's side. As for the cleric, Ink Hunter cast a truth shield on Ridiculous. At the same time, he used Soul Cloud to assist in battle. Instantly, the trio formed a well-coordinated, three-pronged attack. If not dealt with properly, this attack would even instant-kill a peak expert. Die! Ridiculous shouted as he radiated a golden glow, activating Justice Roar and forcing Shifeng to attack him. At the same time, he swung his one-handed axe at the swordsman, utilizing the dazzling glow from his body to hide his attack. However, as Ridiculous swung his axe, an energy pulse radiated from Shifeng, extending across 100 yards before dissipating. Everyone within range suddenly found themselves under an intense suppression. Skyhawk, Ridiculous, and Ink Hunter's basic attributes began to plummet as exhaustion settled in their bones. Disintegration Field. Chapter 1583, Mana Cutter. Chapter 1583, Mana Cutter. When the disintegration field took effect, the three members of Skyhawk's party visibly slowed. Meanwhile, when Ridiculous' one-handed axe was a few inches away from Shifeng's face, it clanged against a blue longsword, unable to move an inch further. This is a domain suppression? When Ridiculous felt his basic attributes decrease, he could not help but stare at the cloaked swordsman before him in astonishment. At this stage of the game, domain skills were as rare as a phoenix's feather. Not only had Shifeng used a domain skill, but it had also reduced his basic attributes by 40%. Only a high-tiered domain skill was capable of accomplishing this. Yet, since the start of the battle, he hadn't seen Shifeng use any magic scrolls. During Ridiculous' brief shock, Skyhawk approached Shifeng's right side and swung the broken pitch-black blade in his hands. Indiscriminate slash. Immediately, over a dozen black energy blades flew towards Shifeng's blind spots. At the same time, Ink Hunter bombarded the swordsman with Soul Cloud, launching magic blades from above. What exquisite coordination! Skyhawk and Ink Hunter's performance shocked the spectating crowd. The two players had timed their attacks perfectly, targeting every one of the swordsman's blind spots. Even an expert player would be forced to activate their strongest life-saving skill in such a predicament. There was no way to block every attack. However, as the numerous attacks soared towards Shifeng, the latter didn't move to defend himself. Rather, Shifeng slashed the abyssal blade towards Skyhawk, who followed his indiscriminate slash with a normal attack. Is he trying to get himself killed? Skyhawk was confused as he watched Shifeng ignore both his indiscriminate slash and Ink Hunter's Soul Cloud. Others might not realize how powerful his indiscriminate slash was, but he was very familiar with the attack. Even though his attributes had decreased, if every one of the dozen or so energy blades struck an MT of the same level, they'd either be near dead or lose half of their HP. Dang. Brilliant sparks scattered when the abyssal blade clashed with Skyhawk's broken sword. Skyhawk's normal attack came to an abrupt halt. As everyone expected the energy and magical blades to devour Shifeng's HP, something astonishing occurred. Both attacks vanished half a yard from Shifeng. It was as if these attacks had never existed. What is going on? Did he use an invulnerability skill? Is he an NPC? Everyone's jaws dropped. All of the watching players were experts in God's domain. They had seen countless skills and spells in their travels, and they had a certain understanding of invulnerability skills. As far as they knew, invulnerability skills typically formed an eye-catching barrier of sorts to protect the player, yet despite the lack of any barrier around Shifeng, both Skyhawk and Ink Hunter's attacks had been nullified. This was simply inconceivable. A defensive skill? Skyhawk remained relatively calm despite his failed attack. Sneering at Shifeng, he hissed, "How long do you think this skill of yours can last? Do you think it can protect you from this?" Skyhawk immediately adjusted his footwork, and his broken blade began to gather a horrific black energy around itself as it slashed towards Shifeng. The black energy quickly formed a black blade over Skyhawk's broken sword. As this black blade moved, it tore apart space itself. Meanwhile, the Guardian Knight attacked from the side. Shield of Vengeance. With Justice Roar already active, his strength and attack speed had doubled. Suddenly, Skyhawk's broken blade split into 5 copies, each resembling a conning, venomous snake as they attempted to strike Shifeng's blind spots. Advanced Combat Technique Snake Bite. Is Skyhawk finally taking this seriously? Hidden Soul frowned slightly as she watched from a distance. Skyhawk's technique standards weren't his only monstrous weapon. The broken, black blade he wielded was also extraordinary. The weapon itself lacked a quality rank, and its only attribute bonus was attack power. It didn't provide any additional basic attributes. In exchange, however, the broken blade had 2 incomparably powerful skills. The first skill was Mana Rebound. The second was Mana Nullification. With this effect, the weapon could even slice through invulnerability skills. One could say that the weapon was a magic killer. In fact, this ability suited the broken blade's name perfectly. Mana Cutter. All defensive spells and skills were useless in the face of Skyhawk's attacks. Moreover, if melee players weren't careful with the skills they used to attack Skyhawk, Mana Rebound might turn their own attacks against them rather than damage Skyhawk. Because of this weapon, Skyhawk was the most formidable of the Flower of Seven Sins 7 commanders. If one wanted to defeat Skyhawk, they had to rely on techniques or basic attributes. Unfortunately, Skyhawk was a monster in both regards. If Hidden Soul had to face such an offensive, even she'd have no choice but to activate Vanish, receiving ridiculous attack, before putting as much distance between herself and Skyhawk as possible. If she tried to fight the Berserker and Guardian Knight simultaneously, she'd have no hope of victory. The Mana Cutter? Shifeng felt a little jealous as he watched the broken pitch-black blade, which had transformed into 5 black snakes. In the past, every player had known about the Flower of Seven Sins commanders. They were just as popular as Super Guild's guild leaders. Their weapons and equipment had been just as famous. Among them, countless berserkers and swordsmen dreamed of wielding Skyhawk's Mana Cutter. Realizing that Skyhawk and ridiculous attacks were about to hit their target, Shifeng disregarded the idea of intercepting them forcibly. Instead, he used Divine Steps and split into 11 copies, spreading out to circle his 2 opponents. Shifeng still suffered a weakened state, and although the duration was much shorter than earlier, it still reduced his basic attributes by 80%. Overall, his basic attributes were only slightly higher than Skyhawk and Ridiculous, who were still suppressed by Disintegration Field. He didn't have the ability to deflect the incoming attacks, which targeted his blind spots and weak points. Doppelgangers? The instant Mana Cutter slid through Shifeng's body, Skyhawk followed up with a whirlwind slash, giving Shifeng no chances to escape his grasp by swapping positions with his doppelgangers. Reacting in a similar manner, Ridiculous followed up his attack with Devotion, an AoE skill that only attacked his enemies. Based on his experience with skills that summon doppelgangers, he immediately determined that Shifeng's doppelgangers were likely invulnerable to attacks and couldn't be differentiated from the true body. In that case, he simply needed to attack all 11 clones with an AoE to find Shifeng. This, however, Ridiculous was dumbfounded after he used Devotion. All 11 doppelgangers remained unharmed. They're all fakes? Skyhawk looked at each clone carefully. He had prepared to launch an attack as soon as his companion revealed Shifeng's real body, but since none of the copies had taken damage, he was at a loss. Using his opponent's shock as an opportunity, Shifeng appeared before Ridiculous and activated the aura of Time's Forbidden Domain. His 2 blades then transformed into streaks of light as the bit into the Guardian Knight before him. Tier 2 Skill Instant Strike. Although Ridiculous noticed Shifeng's attack, due to his weakened physique and the swordsman's attack speed, which had been increased by 500%, he couldn't react in time. He didn't even have time to activate his life-saving skill before Shifeng's attack struck. In the end, he could only watch as the Abyssal Blade and Killing Ray slashed down at him in succession. Before Skyhawk could react, the Guardian Knight's 30,000 HP had fallen to 0. Chapter 1584, Wrong Opponent. Chapter 1584, Wrong Opponent. As Ridiculous HP hit 0, silence descended on the spectating players. As they watched the battle, everyone realized that Skyhawk, Ridiculous, and Ink Hunter were definitely peak experts. The trio's combat standards were even better than theirs, and their weapons and equipment were nothing compared to the trio's. Yet, despite 3 such excellently geared peak experts working together, Shifeng killed one of them without receiving a single point of damage. Moreover, the swordsman had taken out the player with the highest defense and HP. This was simply inconceivable. How is this possible? Ridiculous stared at Shi Feng in shock as his vision began to fade to black. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't rationalize what had just happened. All 11 clones should have been Shi Feng's doppelgangers. Shi Feng's main body should not be among them. When he had used devotion, none of the clones had been affected in the slightest. The only logical explanation was that all 11 clones were doppelgangers, yet one of these clones had killed him. Ridiculous wasn't the only one confused. Skyhawk and Ink Hunter were just as shocked. There were doppelgangers in God's domain that could attack and those that could not. Doppelgangers that could attack were generally much weaker and easier to kill than the main body. In contrast, the majority of doppelgangers that weren't capable of attacks were invulnerable. These doppelgangers mainly served as a distraction. However, not only were Shi Feng's doppelgangers invulnerable, but they could also launch their own attacks. This was beyond their understanding of doppelganger skills. So fast. Who is that? He actually instant-killed Ridiculous. Brute Spear, who watched from a distance, gulped as the previous scene replayed in his mind. Ridiculous techniques were no weaker than his own, but the Guardian Knight was much tougher than a berserker like him. Yet, this Guardian Knight had died without the chance to defend himself. Brute Spear felt every hair on his body rise. No, there's something wrong with Ridiculous, Hidden Soul said, shaking her head. Although that player's attack speed is incredible, it's so fast that Ridiculous wouldn't have time to react and activate a life-saving skill. Had Ridiculous activated his life-saving skill, he wouldn't have died so quickly. At the very least, he could have bought himself enough time for Skyhawk and Ink Hunter to save him. It's highly unlikely that Ridiculous would have made such a major mistake. That player must have done something to prevent Ridiculous from using a life-saving skill in time or at all. By the looks of it, Skyhawk's group provoked the wrong opponent. Brute Spear nodded his agreement. Hidden Soul's deduction sounded logical. Or rather, he wanted to believe in Hidden Soul's reasoning. The thought that someone could overwhelm a peak expert's reactions with attack speed alone was too terrifying. Damn it, it's a silencing skill. Think we're retreating. Skyhawk couldn't help but grit his teeth as he glared at Shi Feng. Decisively, he turned and fled. Skyhawk finally understood why Shi Feng had dared to ascend the World Summit before the Bloodline's restriction period had lifted. Rather than arrogance and foolishness, Shi Feng had done so because he was absolutely confident in his abilities. While they could cope with the basic attribute suppression, it was an entirely different story if they had been silenced. Aside from the fact that they wouldn't receive any healing, the fact that they couldn't transform into their demon states or activate berserk skills put them at an overwhelming disadvantage. He was not afraid of powerful spells or skills, but if his opponent used a berserk skill, his basic attributes would be overwhelmed. Furthermore, his opponent was an incredibly calm, peak expert. Ink Hunter, who stood some distance away, reacted as well, fleeing. What? Skyhawk is actually retreating? Brute Spear gaped as he watched Skyhawk and Ink Hunter run away. Skyhawk was one of the Flower of Seven Sins commanders. Even when against 4 or 5 peak experts, he would likely fight until the bitter end and either wipe out his opponents or take as many lives as he could. Yet, against Shi Feng, Skyhawk had decided to flee. In fact, Brute Spear wasn't the only one shocked. All of the spectating players were dumbfounded. Only, unlike Brute Spear, they weren't surprised by Skyhawk and Ink Hunter's retreat. They were shocked by the strength Shi Feng had displayed. Not only had the swordsman killed a peak expert instantly, but he had also followed up by scaring away 2 other peak experts. He's too strong. Is he an NPC? He actually killed a peak expert from the Flower of Seven Sins. I never knew that there was such a frightening expert among demon players. It would be great if I could get to know him. Everyone deeply admired Shi Feng. They too were experts in God's domain, and they realized how powerful Skyhawk and his party members were. Ordinary experts couldn't compare to the trio, yet Shi Feng had overwhelmed them despite being outnumbered. These players agreed with Skyhawk and Ink Hunter's decision to retreat. Only a fool would try to fight Shi Feng after seeing the swordsman's display of strength. Although players would not lose any levels when they died in the World Summit, they would DOP one of their items. At their levels, every piece of equipment was worth a fortune. This was especially true for peak experts like Skyhawk. You want to escape. Watching Skyhawk and Ink Hunter flee, Shi Feng thrust the abyssal blade into the ground. Abyssal curse. Suddenly, Black mist began to rise from the ground in a 30-yard radius around Shifeng. The mist then transformed into countless pitch-black chains that attempted to bind Skyhawk and Ink Hunter. Reacting quickly, Skyhawk swung the mana cutter at the incoming chains. While in Forbidden Domain, players couldn't use skills or spells, but both of Mana Cutter's skills were passive. Even in Forbidden Domain, the weapon could still slice through spells and skills. As the crowd watched, Skyhawk shattered every one of the pitch-black chains that moved towards him. Unfortunately, although Skyhawk had escaped Abyssal Curse, the cleric Ink Hunter had not. In the end, the chains bound the cleric, and his basic attributes began to decrease once again. Shifeng then left an afterimage behind him as he dashed towards Ink Hunter. "Fight me if you have the guts," Skyhawk shouted, furious as he watched Shifeng charge towards his companion. Ink Hunter was a cleric. Without the ability to use spells and skills, he was powerless against Shifeng. Meanwhile, Shifeng's silencing skill was clearly a region-based skill. As long as they moved out of the affected region, they would be free from the silencing effect. However, if Ink Hunter died before they escaped, he'd be left without a healer to support him. He'd definitely have a difficult time against Shifeng alone. As Skyhawk declared his challenge and before the watching players had realized it, Shifeng had appeared before the Berserker, his sacred sword descending on the commander from the Flower of Seven Sins. Shadow Blade. A single slash, alongside 9 shadows, struck Skyhawk from various directions. Shifeng's sudden appearance had caught Skyhawk off guard, but the Berserker reacted almost immediately, adjusting his footwork and wielding his blade. Advanced Defensive Combat Technique, Iron Wall. The broken blade's trajectory seemed strange as it deflected the incoming attacks. As Mana Cutter countered more of the attacks, its speed seemed to increase. In the end, Skyhawk managed to deflect 9 of the 10 incoming attacks, receiving only 1. When the attack struck, he had lost a little over 2000 HP and retreated several steps. Skyhawk had basically lost 1/10 of his suppressed HP. However, Skyhawk did not pay much mind to the damage. At the very least, he had lured Shifeng in. With this, Ink Hunter could escape the silencing AoE. Once they were free of the silencing effect, recovering his lost HP would be a piece of cake. However, before Skyhawk could celebrate his success, he realized that something was amiss. Originally, there had been 11 copies of the enemy swordsman on the battlefield, but now there were 12. The clone charging towards Ink Hunter had never deviated from its path. At this point in time, said clone had also arrived before the cleric and activated Shadow Blade already. The cleric, with low HP and defense, died instantly as the 10 attacks bit into his body. How is this possible? Skyhawk shifted a bewildered look between the Shifeng that had claimed Ink Hunter's life and the one that stood before him. What he did not know was that Shifeng had never intended to let any of them get away. Shifeng had sent the doppelganger he had summoned with Phantom Kill after Ink Hunter, while his main body had used Void Steps to approach Skyhawk. Chapter 1585, Slaying Skyhawk. Chapter 1585, Slaying Skyhawk. Everyone was stupefied yet again when Ink Hunter had died. They were confused about how Shifeng had 2 main bodies on the battlefield and could actually attack Skyhawk and Ink Hunter simultaneously. Meanwhile, Skyhawk's complexion darkened considerably after he recovered from his momentary shock. Not only was he still stuck in the silencing AoE, but he had also lost his healer. If Shifeng used a berserk skill now, killing him would be very easy. However, what Skyhawk did not know was that Shifeng had recently used twofold berserk and was still in a weakened state, which prevented him from using berserk skills. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to expose trump cards like Forbidden Domain and Phantom Kill. Shifeng didn't give Skyhawk much time to think about his situation as he sent another quick slash at the Berserker. Flame Burst. Although he had already killed Ink Hunter, Skyhawk wasn't an opponent he could take lightly. If he allowed Skyhawk to escape Forbidden Domain and activate a berserk skill, he would definitely be placed in a very passive state. Suddenly, the 2 swords in Shifeng's hands released a burning glow as they approached their target. Shifeng didn't bother with complex techniques, relying on bold, simple movements instead. Experts like Skyhawk had practically no weak points. Skyhawk was more than capable of countering any technique he could use against the Berserker. Hence, rather than wasting stamina and concentration executing powerful combat techniques, it was far more efficient to force Skyhawk to defend himself with simple movements, turning this battle into a contest of stamina and concentration. "Don't even think of killing me that easily," Skyhawk shouted. Reacting, he brandished Mana Cutter to deflect Shifeng's attacks. Boom, boom, boom. Every time the swords clashed, the resulting impacts radiated powerful shockwaves. Even Hidden Soul and the other spectators who stood a safe distance away could clearly feel these shockwaves. Meanwhile, the ground under Skyhawk and Shifeng's feet cracked and shattered. To the watching crowd, it felt as if they were watching two gigantic humanoid beasts clash, rather than players. Even the terrain changed in the wake of their might. In terms of basic attributes, Shifeng was just slightly superior to Skyhawk. Hence, even if Skyhawk received the full force of Shifeng's attacks, he wouldn't take much damage. Furthermore, the Berserker deflected his opponent's attacks rather than block them. However, Shifeng's slashes were far more powerful than Skyhawk's with Flame Burst's explosive power. Although Mana Cutter could slice through projectile skills and spells, it wasn't effective against skills that enhanced their user's power. As a result, every time Skyhawk deflected an attack, he was forced back several steps. His HP fell by over 700 as well. After deflecting 15 consecutive attacks, Skyhawk's HP had fallen to 50%. That guy is amazing. He's actually suppressed Skyhawk despite only having a slight advantage in basic attributes. Not even the other commanders are capable of something like this. Brute Spear could not help but sigh with admiration as he watched Shifeng back Skyhawk into a corner. It's no wonder why the boss always warns us to be careful in the fields. If we accidentally provoke such a hidden expert while adventuring, we'll definitely be in for a painful lesson. Skyhawk's combat standard was extremely high, and Mana Cutter only bolstered his strength. He had never been suppressed in a melee duel against the Seven Sins' other commanders. Normally he was the only one to suppress the others. Hidden Soul nodded in agreement, but as she watched Shifeng's figure, something about the man felt familiar. Could he be Maple Leaf? The thought drifted through Hidden Soul's mind as she watched the battle. She thought it was unlikely that two unknown monster-level experts had visited the World Summit at the same time. Moreover, the doppelganger skill Shifeng had used against Skyhawk was the same skill he had used against the Purgatory Puppets. She also found the situation somewhat hard to believe. Every expert had strengths and weaknesses. For example, some experts focused on fighting monsters, and against monsters they could display extraordinary strength. Meanwhile, some experts preferred to fight other players, and they could display much greater strength against players than they could against monsters. Shifeng had previously displayed incredible combat standards against the Purgatory Puppets, proving that he put quite a bit of effort into fighting monsters. Even Hidden Soul had to admit that she wasn't as skilled as Shifeng in monster battles. Yet, despite facing Skyhawk's three-man party, Shifeng had displayed the same extraordinary tactics and combat standards. His performance wasn't inferior to his fight with the Purgatory Puppets in the least. This proved that he was just as familiar with PvP. As Hidden Soul pondered over Shifeng's identity, the battle between the swordsman and the berserker grew more intense. They began to exchange blows so fast that even many of the watching demon experts could no longer keep up with the battle. Damn it. Not being able to use my skills is too much of a problem. Skyhawk was frustrated as he desperately repelled Shifeng's frenzied attacks. The standard of his techniques was considerably higher than Shifeng's. In a fight where neither combatant could use skills or spells, he'd have no fear of Shifeng. Yet, Shifeng had used a skill that boosted his attack's destructive power before launching swift and straightforward attacks, forcing him to receive the attacks one way or another. Had Shifeng relied on projectiles, he could have easily found an opportunity to use Mana Cutter to turn the tables on the swordsman, but as if Shifeng had known about the weapon's abilities, he refused to give Skyhawk such an opportunity. This forced him into a passive situation, having to focus on his own defense. As a result, he could only watch as his HP continued to decrease. Moreover, Shifeng had yet to use a berserk skill or his demon state. That's not right. Considering the events up to this point, Skyhawk suddenly realized a possibility as to why Shifeng would bother to fight him for so long. With a sneer he hissed, "I understand now. The reason you haven't used a berserk skill yet isn't that you don't want to, but because something is preventing you from doing so. You're trying to desperately to deplete my HP so you can kill me before I leave your silencing AoE, aren't you?" Shifeng didn't bother to reply to Skyhawk's accusation. Instead, he activated Illusory Shadow. Although illusory shadows attacks were quite weak, only dealing 40% of a normal attack's damage, the attacks couldn't be blocked. Your silence only confirms my guess. Since you can't use your berserk skill, I don't have to be careful around you anymore. Skyhawk smiled. Immediately he executed a deceptive footwork technique, retreating at a much faster pace. He hadn't put much focus into escaping the silencing skill since he couldn't find any hope of victory. Even if he could use a berserk skill or transform into his demon state, so could Shifeng. But now things had changed. Once he was out of range of the silencing AoE, he could use his berserk skill. Killing Shifeng would be a piece of cake. To put it simply, this battle's outcome depended on whether or not he could escape the silencing AoE safely. As Skyhawk inched towards the edge of the silencing AoE, his focus sharpened. As a result, the drain on his HP began to slow. In 10 seconds I'll escape your silencing skill. It's impossible to deplete my remaining HP in so little time. I have to admit, though, you are the first person to force me into such a position since I've joined God's domain. You should be proud of this fact. Do you have any last words? Skyhawk asked, smiling arrogantly at Shifeng. Is that so? Shifeng grinned suddenly. In the next moment, a black figure descended from the skies and landed behind Skyhawk. This figure was none other than Shifeng's doppelganger. The doppelganger had already activated Flame Burst and brandished its swords at the berserker. Seeing this, Skyhawk's expression darkened. Hurriedly, he spun and used Mana Cutter to deflect the incoming attacks. As for Shifeng, he activated Dragon's Authority and executed Sword's Orbit. Dragon's Authority immediately inflicted the Fear debuff on Skyhawk. Not only did the debuff decrease the berserker's attack power by 40%, but it also reduced his attack speed and movement speed by 40%. With Skyhawk's attack speed decreased significantly, he couldn't keep up with both Shifeng and his doppelganger. As a result, he had to watch, helpless, as one sword light after another sliced through his body and stole a significant portion of his already low HP. He had only needed 10 more seconds to reach the edge of the silencing AoE, yet it now seemed endlessly far away. In the end, Skyhawk's HP plummeted, and like a puppet with cut strings, the berserker's body collapsed to the ground. You should be proud of the fact that you forced me to attack in sync with my doppelganger, Shifeng said softly as he looked at the fallen berserker. Chapter 1586, Demon King's Horn. Although Shifeng had only spoken after Skyhawk's HP had reached 0, players would retain their senses for a short moment after they died in God's domain. Only players weren't able to move. Skyhawk nearly spat blood when he heard Shifeng's statement. Had he had use of his skills, Shifeng's mindless, brutish attacks wouldn't have claimed his life outright even without activating his berserk skill. However, Skyhawk's HP had already reached 0. Even if he wanted to say something, he couldn't. He could only wait, hateful, as the system gradually sent him out of the World Summit. When the spectating crowd saw Skyhawk's corpse on the ground, they gulped audibly as they turned towards the swordsman beside said corpse. Shifeng was too strong. This was the first time that they, as expert players, had realized that players could dominate a battle by relying on skills, not just basic attributes and techniques. Despite facing 3 peak experts simultaneously, Shifeng had killed all 3 by relying on his skills. Shifeng's skills were so powerful that Skyhawk's party hadn't been able to retaliate in the slightest. First, Shifeng had suppressed his opponents with a domain skill. He then used a silencing AoE skill and another skill that allowed him to instant-kill a Guardian Knight. In the end, he had relied on his doppelgangers to fight a 2-on-1 battle. With his numerous skills, he had crushed any advantage his opponents had possessed. After this battle, these expert players realized how important skills and spells actually were. Now they understood that skills and spells could make up for their imperfections, furthering their combat powers. Even when struggling with an overwhelming disadvantage, they could rely on the synergy of powerful skills and spells to turn the tide of battle. Shifeng was proof of this. Skyhawk died just like that. He's definitely going to get an earful when he reports back to the main headquarters. Brute Spear could not help but laugh as he watched Skyhawk's body gradually disappear. We really have to thank this mysterious expert. As the Sin of Wrath's commander, everyone in the Flower of Seven Sins recognized the man's strength. He had achieved quite a bit in the organization. This was also why Skyhawk was so dissatisfied with Hidden Soul, who had recently been promoted to the Sin of Pride's commander due to her connections. Hidden Soul faced a lot of pressure in the organization, but now that Skyhawk had died during an attempted robbery, he would lose quite a bit of influence. Mysterious expert? Hidden Soul could not help but shake her head. Smiling bitterly, she said, "He is no mysterious expert. In fact, you know him." "I know him?" Brute Spear was confused. "If I'm not mistaken, he is Maple Leaf," Hidden Soul said as she stared at Shifeng's distant figure. Although he had hidden his appearance under a black cloak, one of the doppelganger skills he used during the fight is the same skill Maple used in the entrance test. "He's Brother Maple?" Brute Spear turned to Shifeng with wide eyes, shocked. He couldn't believe it. Not only was Shifeng ridiculously powerful against monsters, but he was equally powerful in PvP. "Commander, if we can deepen our relationship with Brother Maple, wouldn't we have a better chance of retrieving the item?" Brute Spear suggested excitedly. "MHM. But this isn't the time to ask him," Hidden Soul said after giving the matter some thought. "He has just killed Skyhawk. Even if Skyhawk can stomach this grievance, the elders aren't likely to turn the other way. They'll do everything to learn as much as they can about him. It won't be too late to contact Maple once the elders have discovered his true identity." After giving the matter some thought, Brute Spear understood Hidden Soul's reasoning. The Flower of Seven Sins was a mysterious organization, which everyone in the virtual gaming world feared and revered. Meanwhile, news of a mysterious player killing a commander like Skyhawk would leak sooner or later. The other superpowers would laugh at and ridicule the Flower of Seven Sins. If the organization wanted to maintain its reputation, it couldn't sit still and do nothing. Otherwise, the organization's prestige would plummet. While the watching players discussed Shifeng and the battle, the swordsman began to collect the loot Skyhawk and his party had dropped. Skyhawk, Ridiculous, and Ink Hunter were all bona fide peak experts. Every weapon and piece of equipment they used was the best of the best. When Skyhawk had died, not only had he dropped level 45 dark gold plate armor gloves, but he had also dropped a horn that radiated dense, demonic power. As it lay on the ground, it increased the demonic power in the air by several fold. "What's this?" Shifeng picked up the horn curiously and inspected it. Demon King's Horn, Epic Rank Consumable. This horn carries the power of a living Demon King. Activating the horn will allow you to execute an attack with the power this Demon King had during his life. Activating the Demon King's power will cost 30,000 magic crystal. Can be used 2 more times. Shifeng was dumbfounded when he read the Demon King's Horn's description. A moment later, ecstasy gripped his heart. An epic consumable. This item was far rarer than an ordinary epic item, and it was obvious that Skyhawk had purchased it with his shrine points. However, it seemed that the Berserker had been in so much of a hurry to kill Shifeng that he had ignored the restriction period. In the end, Skyhawk had dropped the Demon King's Horn. When Skyhawk realized that he had lost this item, he would die from regret. Not even Shifeng could help but pity Skyhawk a little. Needless to say, Skyhawk had spent most if not all of the shrine points he had earned from the Divine Staircase on this item. If Shifeng had been in his place, he wouldn't have spent his points on the horn. After all, it was merely a consumable item. It would disappear once its usage counts had been spent. However, Shifeng had to admit that the item could exert an astounding amount of power due to its limited usage counts. With it, a player could use all of the potential of an epic item in an instant. In God's domain, Demon Kings were Tier 5 existences. Although their life ratings were lower than fallen angels, they were still Tier 5 creatures. On their own, they had enough combat power to devastate an entire kingdom. Quite a few Demon Kings had roamed God's domain in Shifeng's previous life. These Demon Kings had significantly changed the kingdoms they had risen in. To defeat these Demon Kings, the various local guilds had made astronomical sacrifices. Could that fellow have intended to raid a mythic monster? Shifeng wondered as he gazed at the Demon King's Horn. Since the Demon King's Horn allowed a player to use a Demon King's power, the player could launch an attack of a Tier 5 creature. A Tier 5 attack could even wound a Tier 5 monster severely if not dealt with properly. To current players, however, Tier 5 monsters were practically invincible. No player would be foolish enough to challenge a Tier 5 creature at this stage of the game. The only reason why Skyhawk would purchase this item was to face a Tier 4 mythic monster. Although mythic monsters were still insurmountable to current players, it was possible to take one down with the help of the Demon King's Horn and a few other powerful items. Now that Shi Feng had obtained the Demon King's horn, he had gained another trump card, which was even stronger than the elemental sources, to deal with mythic monsters in the future. He could even use it to deal with the final boss in a level 50 super large-scale team dungeon. The only problem was the high requirement of magic crystals to activate the Demon King's horn. Not just any guild could afford to part with 30,000 magic crystals. Not even Zero Wing could afford the expenditure. Many aspects demanded magic crystals of the guild. Right now, Zero Wing couldn't even afford to spend 10,000 magic crystals, let alone 30,000. Forget it. It's better than not having it at all. After pondering the situation for a moment, Shi Feng decided to set the Demon King's horn aside for now, continuing towards the World Summit's epic area. Meanwhile, news of Shi Feng's single-handed annihilation of Skyhawk's party spread like wildfire, quickly reaching the various superpowers' ears. Chapter 1587, Mysterious Expert. Chapter 1587, Mysterious Expert. Players bustled about on the streets of a guild town, protected by tall walls. Quite a few of these players were architects, busily constructing all types of buildings. From the top floor of an open-air restaurant in the town, a middle-aged man in dark gray armor quietly watched these architects. A flame-shaped shield rested beside his chair. Suddenly, a young man burst into the room, running up to the middle-aged man. "Uncle Yuan, something big has happened," the young man excitedly reported. "We just received news that Skyhawk, one of the Flower of Seven Sins commanders, has been killed." The middle-aged man in question was none other than the secret pavilion's Yuan Tiexin. He had already reached level 50 and wore the level 50 fine gold ranked landslide set, a set equipment for shield warriors which could only be obtained from level 50, 100-man team dungeons. "Skyhawk has been killed?" Yuan Tiexin turned towards the young man in astonishment. "How is that possible? Did someone organize an expert team to ambush him? No, that can't be right. We're talking about one of the Seven Sins commanders here. The Flower of Seven Sins definitely won't take such a blow lying down." Skyhawk was one of only 7 commanders in the Flower of Seven Sins. His individual strength even ranked near the top in the assassination organization. Yuan Tiexin found it truly hard to believe that a handful of players could kill such an expert. The only possibility was that some superpower had organized a small army to ambush the man. They'd also need various powerful tools to ensure that he couldn't escape. No, that's not the case. Based on what we've heard, it seems that Skyhawk and 2 of his close aides attempted to rob another player. In the end, that player turned the tables and the 3 lost their lives, the young man explained, stammering. Skyhawk led his men to kill a player, but ended up dead instead? How is that possible? Yuan Tiexin was even more shocked. Not only had Skyhawk died, but he had also been killed by a lone player. The man had even had the numerical advantage in the situation. No matter how Yuan Tiexin considered the younger man's words, they sounded like a joke. "It's true. Here's a video of the battle," the young man said as he hurriedly relayed the recording. The video had been recorded some distance from the battlefield, so the fight's details weren't clear. However, Skyhawk's mana cutter was. There was no doubt that the berserker wielding the broken blade was indeed Skyhawk. What powerful skills! Although Yuan Tiexin could not see the entire process of the battle clearly, he could, more or less, deduce the reason that Skyhawk's party had lost. Just who is that player? We're already doing our best to investigate this matter. Unfortunately, we can only glean a limited amount of information from the video. Although the Flower of Seven Sins should have access to more details, our spies in the organization are too low-ranked to gain access to the information. The guild leader has already asked us to find this expert as quickly as possible, and he has stated that we cannot allow the Flower of Seven Sins to reach the player before we do. I understand. I'll do my best to look into the matter. After Yuan Tiexin finished with the video, he became interested in the mysterious expert who had killed Skyhawk's 3-man party. He immediately ordered his subordinates to investigate the battle video. Meanwhile, God's Domain's other superpowers began their own investigations. At this point, Shi Feng, who was wholly ignorant of the commotion he had caused, reached the World Summit's epic shrine area. Compared to the dark gold and fine gold areas, the epic area was void of players. The majestic epic shrines in the area remained unoccupied. Shi Feng didn't need to worry about any competition over the shrines. The god crystals aren't as valuable as epic items, but the shrine's difficulty increases with altitude. Correspondingly, the shrines should offer more treasures. I may be able to find god crystals in the lowermost shrines. After a quick inspection of the epic shrines dotting the mountainside, Shi Feng began his mission. The lowermost region of the epic area had a total of 21 epic shrines. Shi Feng did not put too much thought into the matter and approached the closest shrine. When he reached the shrine's entrance, Shi Feng placed a hand on the doors before him. System: Inferior Legendary Shrine Key detected. You are qualified to open the doors of the epic shrine. Do you wish to spend 1,000 minutes to open them? Shi Feng clicked Agree without hesitation. Immediately, the shrine doors swung open, allowing Shi Feng to enter. The moment Shi Feng stepped into the shrine, he felt as if he had entered a different world. He stood on a platform above the clouds, and from time to time, Shi Feng spotted flying beasts soaring by. These monsters were all frighteningly strong, and even the weakest among them was a level 150 Great Lord. Some of these flying beasts were even level 180 mythic monsters. Any one of these monsters could easily extinguish Shi Feng's life. Multiple humanoid statues had been erected in the center of the platform, and dazzling items and translucent, crystal boxes had been placed before each statue. Even from this distance, Shi Feng could tell that every one of these items was extraordinarily valuable. When Shi Feng tried to approach one of the statues to inspect the items before it, the sound of another system notification reached his ears. System: You may choose one item before the numerous statues. As long as you fulfill the requirements, you may obtain the item you desire. If you fail to complete the requirements within the given time limit, you will be teleported out of the shrine automatically. Sure enough, the system won't let players take these items easily. Shi Feng wasn't particularly surprised. Although every shrine in the World Summit offered its own rewards, not every shrine granted players a reward upon entry. Some required players to pass certain tests. The Shrine of the Lord of Destruction, which Shi Feng had previously visited, was one such example. If players did not choose the appropriate shrines based on their strength, they might walk away empty-handed. A total of 12 statues occupied the platform. Among the items before the statues were damaged items, and there were 5 pieces of intact epic equipment, 2 epic weapons and 1 epic item. According to the acquisition difficulty in God's domain, the epic item would be the most difficult to obtain, while the damaged items would be the easiest. It was relatively easy to determine the various statues' difficulty levels. However, none of this mattered to Shi Feng. After all, he was not here for practical items. The god crystals were his only goal. Please let this be a god crystal. Shi Feng then approached one of the statues with a damaged item. The moment he made his choice, the stone statue before him began to crack. The cracked stone fell to reveal a stalwart man wielding a two-handed sword and wearing golden armor. Shrine Knight, High Human, Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Level 100. HP 20, 000, 000/20, 000, 000. The moment the Shrine Knight appeared, Shi Feng felt an unprecedented pressure bear down on him. Normally, NPCs' combat techniques were far stronger than monsters of the same level and tier. Furthermore, the NPC before him was a high human. High humans were unlike the current humans populating the God's Domain continent. High humans had long since gone extinct in God's domain. Long ago, the gods had blessed high humans, and their life rating was much higher than their ordinary current cousins. They were bona fide humanoid monsters. In fact, the legends that spoke about humans who had slain dragons didn't refer to current humans, but high humans. Current humans' life rating was far lower than dragons, and not even a Tier 5 NPC would be a match for an ordinary Tier 5 dragon. However, high humans could fight and defeat dragons. As another example of how powerful high humans were, the Tier 4 Shrine Knight before Shi Feng could easily kill mythic monsters of the same level as if they were ants. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.